Chapter 6:15. Fan Xian lowered his head and moved closer in front of the young lady of the Wang family. He looked at her closely until the bawling woman became uncomfortable. Only then did he say seriously, "Do you know how to write the word shame?" The young lady of the Wang family gritted her teeth and stared fiercely into Fan Xian's eyes. If the king said she did not know shame, she would be hurt, disappointed, and angry. However, she felt even more wronged. That was why she had come to the manor to seek justice from the king. However, for Sir Fan Jr. to say she did not know shame made it difficult for her to accept. Fan Xian straightened his body and gave a glance to the nervous servants in the manor beside him to have them retreat further. Only then did he open his mouth to ask the young lady of the Wang family, "Do you think that making such a ruckus today is very reasonable?" "I just don't know. The king and I have only met once in Uncle's manor. How can I be shameless?" The young lady of the Wang family bit her lip. Her eyes were red like a rabbit ready to pounce and bite at any moment. She stared angrily into Fan Xian's eyes and said, "Yesterday, I didn't dare to make a sound at the banquet. I didn't even dare to say a word. In the end, I was called shameless by you. Today, I came to make a fuss and let you see what true shamelessness looks like." Fan Xian felt something was strange in his heart, but he couldn't be bothered to probe deeper. He just couldn't stand the sight of a king being forced by both the palace and an unruly woman to shut himself in. Thus, he had revealed himself and was prepared to teach this woman a lesson on behalf of Governor Wang. However, at this moment, an idea flashed through his mind and he thought of a seemingly good way out. Being watched by Fan Xian's quiet and silent gaze, the young lady's voice became lower and lower. She gradually couldn't vent anymore. She felt like she had seen a ghost. Why was it that when she saw this young noble, her aura immediately disappeared without a trace? No matter how much she cheered herself on, she didn't dare to yell at him. In reality, it was still a matter of power. Fan Xian's position was high and important. Within the Qing kingdom, no one doubted he was the #1 person behind the emperor. In addition, 2 years ago, after he had broken the heartbreaking arrow with a stunning spear, his temperament had broken through again. He had long stood firmly in the realm of the upper 9th level, and faintly became a first-rate figure below the great grandmaster. With power and aura added together, even if he was facing Governor Wang or even the ruthless Xueqi of the past, Fan Xian would not have any thoughts of giving way. Now, without the chest by his side, he reckoned that he could still confront Xueqi head-on, not to mention that the opponent was a spoiled girl who only knew how to make a scene. Furthermore, he was often immersed in the affairs of the Overwatch Council. No matter how bright and gentle his face was, there would always be a glimmer of coldness hidden deep within. This kind of coldness, for a woman like the young lady of the Wang family, was the most terrifying feeling. Facing Fan Xian, the young lady of the Wang family felt an inexplicable fear. She no longer had the imposing manner of stomping on the stone lion and cursing the manor. Instead, she gradually lowered her head and looked pitifully at the tightly closed courtyard door behind her. She wondered if she had made a big mistake by following him into the manor. It was as if Fan Xian did not see her expression at all. He opened his mouth and began to speak harshly, including what he had seen and heard at the west gate of Jingdo, his disgraceful behavior earlier in front of the manor, and the whip marks on the old housekeeper's face. The more he spoke, the colder his words became, and the harsher his tone became. It was as if he wanted to shame the young lady of the Wang family into a crack in the rock. The scene at this moment was wonderful. Including the housekeeper of the manor, all of the servants had hidden far away. Wang Yi and Wang Fei were even more cunning as they hid in the back courtyard and refused to come out to welcome the guests. Inside the gate, in the empty space beside the fake mountain, were Fan Xian and the young lady of the Wang family, the two guests meeting for the first time. Two guests going through a soul-deep re-education behind the main door of the manor looked rather absurd. After using the sharpest words to harshly lecture the young lady of the Wang family in front of him, Fan Xian's mood became much better. Seeing her lowered head and her angry and ashamed expression that she forced herself not to speak, he felt a glimmer of strangeness. This young lady's unruliness was truly loathsome. However, it looked like she knew her unruliness was wrong. Fan Xian was a little surprised. He immediately furrowed his brows and said, "Do you know your wrongs?" The young lady stubbornly did not reply because Fan Xian's words were truly too piercing, particularly this indifferent and bitter tone. It was completely like he was her elder. A moment later she said in a loud voice, "You are Sister Ye's teacher, not mine." Speaking of Yiling, I have to remind you of something. Fan Xian's eyes narrowed. Although she also gallops around Jingdo, she has never hurt anyone. She would not use a whip to whip an old man. She was indeed a very unruliness, but her unruliness was directed at specific targets and not the pitiful common people. The people of Jingdo liked her and let her have her way, not because of Commander Ye's background, but because of her kindness. He smiled coldly at the young lady of the Wang family and said, "If you want to learn from Yilinger, you'll have to wash away all of this annoying aura on your body." Sister Yi. Unruliness toward whom? The young lady of the Wang family opened her eyes wide and did not notice Fan Xian's last words. Fan Xian was startled and incomparably angry. Other than unruliness toward him, who else could she be toward? Shortly after, his expression darkened. After purposely being silent for a moment, he said darkly, "It is not an easy matter to marry the prince. If you can't change your bad habits, there is no way." The young lady of the Wang family was frightened by his expression, and unconsciously prepared to flee out of the manor. However, hearing the word marry, her heart burned like a fire. However, she knew that her temper was truly too bad. If she could change it, the teaching nannies the palace had sent these days would not have such a headache. Speaking of which, it was funny. After Fan Xian's mockery, this woman actually became a bit more self-aware. "I am willing to change." Her face was completely covered in tears. It is easy to change mountains and rivers, but it is difficult to change a person's nature. Fan Xian stared at her and smiled slightly. "Take me as your teacher. I will cut off all of your thorns." The young lady of the Wang family felt a chill in her heart. She was terrified and also a glimmer of anger. Although he was the emperor's illegitimate child and had unparalleled power, he was, after all, only a young man in his 20s. How could he have the nerve to be her teacher? She immediately remembered that the person in front of her had been the teacher of the third prince and Sister Ye's teacher. Although he was young, he had already taken 2 students. One was her idol, and the other should be the future emperor of Qing Kingdom. Now, he was willing to take her as a disciple? Fan Xian did not give her any time to think. With his hands behind his back, he walked coldly toward the depths of the manor. The young lady gritted her teeth, lifted her skirt, and ran after him. Running behind Fan Xian, she was very careful. She finally understood that perhaps Sir Fan Jr. was willing to take her as a student because he truly wanted to create an opportunity for her to enter the manor. The emperor was prepared to have Sir Fan Jr., after he returned to the capital, persuade the prince to take a secondary fei. This inside information had already spread. The young lady knew that whether or not she could enter this manor depended largely on Fan Xian. Hearing that he was willing to take her as a disciple, how could she not be happy? Fan Xian heard the sound of her footsteps and didn't turn his head. Straightforwardly, he said, "If you want to be my student, you have to be prepared to be beaten by me." The young lady was furious. She had lived for so long. Who dared to beat her? Immediately after, she thought of her own happiness and couldn't help but close her mouth in sadness. "Apologize to your housekeeper. Go find the people who were injured by your horse when they entered the city. Pay the medical fees and apologize." "Yes, sir." "Don't let me find out that after you apologize, you have thoughts of revenge in your heart. Don't let this kind of thing happen again." "Yes, sir." "Tomorrow, have General Shi send someone to bring you to the Fan Manor. Take 10 whips, and then this first matter will be over." The young lady of the Wang family stood dumbfounded. She had thought that she had already given Sir Fan Jr. enough face by suppressing her anger, agreeing to apologize to the housekeeper, and comforting those lowly commoners. Unexpectedly, this person was actually going to use a whip to beat her. "You're shameless." In Prince Huching's quiet study, the great prince pointed at Fan Xian's nose and cursed angrily in a trembling voice. Across from him, Fan Xian did not show any weakness. With a face full of anger, he slapped off the great prince's finger and cursed, "You're the shameless one." The great prince said Fan Xian was shameless because he had brought the young lady of the Wang family into the manor and chased her to Wang Fei's residence. Furthermore, the great prince had heard clearly the conversation between Fan Xian and the young lady along the way. Fan Xian had taken her as a student and pulled the relationship between him and the Wang family closer. This made him very angry and confused. These few days, the palace had been secretly urging him to take a secondary fei. They had even picked someone for him. Although the great prince had forcefully resisted a number of times, in the end, No one dared to directly challenge the emperor's authority. His mood was in an unusually violent state. Particularly yesterday, the new commander of the Jingdo garrison, Xueqi, had specially invited the great prince to a banquet. No matter what, he had to give this face. He had not expected that after 3 rounds of the banquet, Xueqi would act like a matchmaker and invite the bashful young lady of the Wang family. The great prince immediately knew what was going on. In a rage, he flicked his sleeves and left, not leaving any face for the people from Yanjing. What made the great prince most angry was the attitude Fan Xian had displayed earlier. He had been vexed these past few days, but he had thought that once Fan Xian returned, his shockingly capable brother would certainly be able to think of a way to satisfy both sides. He would be able to cancel this marriage and make the emperor happier. At the beginning, the scene at the gates of the manor had made the great prince very happy. He thought that a crafty and unruly person like the young lady of the Wang family would indeed need someone as sinister as Fan Xian to deal with. He had not expected that Fan Xian's attitude would undergo a drastic change later on. Not only did he bring the young lady into the manor, he had also taken her as a student. "How am I shameless?" the great prince roared at Fan Xian. He had called Fan Xian shameless because he had disregarded their brotherhood and dragged him into the abyss. He had not expected that Fan Xian would dare to call him shameless. "You're not shameless?" Fan Xian's face was full of anger. "What is the point of dragging me into the mess of your own manor? You dare to offend the emperor and the generals in Yanjing. Do you want me to offend them as well? She's just a silly little girl. With the means you and your husband have, you can easily get rid of her at any time. You even had to eagerly send the horse to me for me to handle. You too forcefully dragged me into the water. Isn't that shameless?" The great prince was speechless. After discussing it with Wang Fei for a dozen days, he felt that in the current situation, it seemed that only Fan Xian could resolve this problem. He indeed had thoughts of dragging him into the water. He coughed and said guiltily, "In any case, father was prepared to have you come to the manor to be a lobbyist. I'll pull you to my side first so that we can argue more in the future." "Pah! I'm not a matchmaker," Fan Xian scolded without good humor. The great prince said seriously, "But, you are an official of Taichung Temple." Fan Xian shook his head helplessly. The official of Taichung Temple was in charge of the matters of the royal family. As for the marriages of the princes and dukes, it was up to him to handle. The two of them fell silent at the same time. After experiencing the Jingdo rebellion 2 years ago, this pair of brothers were no longer like before, only relying on their relationship with Chen Pingping and Lady Ning to stand shoulder to shoulder. They truly had the friendship of killing enemies together and the feeling of living and dying together. In these 2 years, their relationship could not be better. "What do you mean by taking her as a student?" The great prince stared into Fan Xian's eyes. "You know I don't want to take on a secondary Fei. Let's not talk about this for now. Let's talk about the young lady of the Wang family." Fan Xian lowered his head and thought for a moment. He then said, "This girl's family name is Wang Tong-er. She is Governor Wang's precious daughter. At yesterday's banquet, she did not lose her composure like she did today. Why did you call her shameless?" The great prince said, "Although this girl's personality is rumored to not be good, I've only seen her once. As a prince, how could I rashly criticize the daughter of a general?" Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly and said, "I knew you weren't that kind of person." These words were gossip that the teaching nannies in the palace passed through the serving girls of the Wang family to Miss Wang's ears. That is why she came to make such a fuss today. It is clear that the palace wants her to make a fuss so that the entire city knows, and Wang Fei is secretly angry. He raised his head and looked at the great prince. She is, after all, a daughter of the Wang family. Her status is sufficiently noble. Furthermore, as you know, ever since the Dong Mountain incident, the Qing court's attitude toward northern Qi has undergone a great change. Everyone's attitude toward Wang Fei is not what it was before. The great prince nodded silently. Wang Fei had not been willing to leave the manor these 2 years because she did not want to endure the hostile gazes of the common people of the Qing kingdom. Northern Qi had participated in the plot to assassinate the emperor. No one could escape this hatred. Thus, if this matter truly becomes a scandal and the emperor directly decrees a marriage, I'm afraid all the civil and military officials in court will support it. Wang Fei must abdicate. All the civil and military officials in court. The great prince furrowed his brows and refuted. This Miss Wang's reputation is not very good. Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, "Who are you? You are the eldest son of the royal family, the only prince who can lead a northern expedition. You are the pride of the Qing kingdom." "Never mind, Miss Wang. As long as your Wang Fei can change from a northern Qi person to a Qing person, even if she is a Sao, these officials, scholars, and people will carry her into the manor for you." The great prince's heart chilled. It was as if he saw a large white sow tied to a pole with red ribbons around her body being carried into the manor amidst the sound of trumpets and suona. "I already understood on the way here. Regardless of whether it is you or me, neither of us can stop this matter. There are only two of us. How can we oppose the entire court?" Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly. "You want to reject the marriage and also make the emperor happy. This is impossible." The great prince sat down dejectedly. He had completely lost the heroic spirit he had when he attacked Western Hu. He muttered to himself, "Do I really have to take a secondary fei? If you don't want the matter to become too big and the emperor to be angry and directly depose your Wang Fei because of jealousy of not having an heir, then taking a secondary fei is inevitable. At least, it can drag on for a while." Fan Xian looked at him with pity, thinking that a prince leading an army was indeed much more miserable than he was. "Look at all the officials in the court," he said in a comforting voice. "Who doesn't have 3 wives and 4 concubines? Even that old Xu Wu has a few concubines in their 20s in his manor. Wang Fei is a reasonable and courteous person. She won't argue too much about the matter of taking a secondary fei. Multiple wives? Why don't I see you taking a few more?" the great prince said angrily. He then fell silent. He knew that the matter of taking a secondary fei could not be dragged on. He also knew that Fan Xian had purposely not brought it up. The so-called taking a secondary fei was actually a preparation to depose Wang Fei in the future. Although the great prince and Wang Fei were a political marriage during the honeymoon period of the two countries, the two of them were harmonious and had a good relationship. If Wang Fei was truly deposed, he would not accept it no matter what. "Although Wang Tong'er and I have only met for the first time today, we have spoken a few words." Seeing the change in the great prince's expression, Fan Xian said evenly, "If you want to take a secondary fei, she is the best choice. Otherwise, my attitude would not have changed so much." Just this. The great prince suddenly stood up. In the end, he still had a generous personality and resisted scolding that woman. Chapter 616. Even though Wang Tong'er had blocked the front door of the manor and scolded him for a long time, the great prince still perfectly maintained the image of a mature man. Up until now, he had not said a single harsh word to the young girl. Although the other party was the daughter of the governor of Yanjing, the first prince was a legitimate prince. The difference in their statuses made it so that he did not have to consider too much. However, he still tried his best to maintain a calm state of mind. After hearing Fan Xian's words, he did not follow and scold the girl for being a scoundrel. He only furrowed his brows and said, "Who knows why you took her on as a student?" "I don't believe you can't guess," Fan Xian said with a smile. "Of course, I'm worried that after the manor already has a tigress, there will be another little leopard. If I can teach this young lady of the Wang family to be well-informed, well-mannered, and well-behaved, what are you afraid of taking her on as a disciple?" After going around and around, Fan Xian was still urging the great prince to take a secondary fei. The great prince said angrily, "I really don't know where your usually admirable foresight has gone. How dare you say this silly girl is not a good choice?" "What's not good?" Fan Xian's smile faded and he said seriously, "I don't need to remind you. You should know that your roots are in the military. She is Wang Zhikuan's daughter. If you take her on as a secondary fei, your relationship with the military will certainly become closer. Don't forget, although your prestige in the military is high, the Western Expedition Army has long been broken up. You cannot return to Dingzhou, and your position as commander of the Imperial Army has also been removed. This is my father's intention." The great prince's expression became cold. Unexpectedly, "Your calculations are as good as my father's." Fan Xian raised his brows and sat down. Everyone can see the emperor's intentions clearly. There has to be a woman entering the manor and keeping an eye on the position of Wang Fei at all times. If you don't want Wang Fei to be deposed, then having Wang Tong'er enter the manor is better than having someone else. The great prince stared at him with confusion. He wondered why Fan Xian's intentions had changed so much. He firmly believed that Wang Tong'er was the best choice. Wang Tong'er's background was very deep. She had the military and Yanjing factions supporting her. Additionally, the emperor was secretly letting her go. Once this woman entered the manor, she would immediately threaten Wang Fei's position. The reason why I said that Wang Tong'er is a good choice is because this girl really likes you, Fan Xian said. Furthermore, although this young lady's personality is a bit shrewish and vicious, she is a girl who walks the path of slashing and killing. This kind of person looks troublesome, but it is actually easier to deal with. You don't want the new secondary Fei in the manor to be like the eldest princess, who appears weak on the surface but is actually incomparably powerful in the dark. The first prince thought about it and realized that this was indeed the case. Wang Tong'er dared to come to the prince's mansion to cause trouble before the edict from the palace had been issued. She was indeed not a woman who walked the path of a seductive woman. But he thought about it again, and still frowned and said, "But she is only a 15-year-old girl, she is not sensible at all. What if after entering the palace, she holds a kitchen knife every day? What should we do?" "His Majesty means that we can't openly resist." Fan Xian looked into his eyes and quietly advised, "But, we can try to deal with it in another way. As for whether or not Wang Tong'er will cause trouble in the future, that will depend on how I, her teacher, teach her and how you two respond." He took a sip of tea and suddenly felt that his heart was becoming harder and harder. After a self-mocking smile he said, "It's still that old saying. Wang Tong'er likes you, so as long as she enters the manor, she will treat you as her sky. Whether a person is satisfied or not depends mainly on what they wish for. If it was another young lady, perhaps she would not be satisfied if she didn't become a Wang Fei. I think Wang Tong'er will probably be satisfied if she marries you." The first prince glanced at him non-committally and lightly said, "How can you be so sure of a girl's thoughts? If we really take her into the manor and she causes chaos in the manor, are you going to clean it up?" I'll do it. Fan Xian shrugged and said, "When it comes to a girl's thoughts, there is no other man in the world who understands them better than me. You have to have confidence in me." The great prince thought that Fan Xian's words were not arrogant. Just looking at how many young girls had been mesmerized by Story of the Stone and his glorious accomplishments in his life, not only had he mesmerized his beloved sister Chen to death, but he had also mesmerized the saint girl of northern Qi's Tianyi Dao to the point of losing her soul. From this, one could tell that his judgment was reasonable. "I just don't understand why Miss Wang has to keep an eye on me. You have to know that we only met once at Shi Fei's banquet." The great prince stared at Fan Xian and said, "To like someone at first sight. If the other party was a monster like you, it might be possible. Women and men are two different creatures." Fan Xian patted his shoulder with pity and said, "If a man like you can't understand, then don't think about it." The great prince spat angrily and immediately thought of a problem. "For a busy official like you to take Wang Tong'er as a female student, it is not just because of me." Fan Xian smiled awkwardly and said, "You already understand, so what are you asking?" "You have to know that I'm not like you. Other than the Black Knights, I have nothing else. It's not wrong to have a good relationship with the military elders. I don't want a second Qin family that hates me to the bone to appear." The great prince paused for a moment and then sighed. "Yi Zhong's girl has always listened to you. Now, you won't even let Wang Zhikuan's daughter go. Truly." These words sound awkward. Fan Xian rubbed his nose and laughingly scolded, "I'm not an animal. These two are your brother's wives. You can't speak blindly. But they are also your female students," the great prince said with a deep smile. "Additionally, Hongqing is in Dingzhou. Although father has always strictly forbidden you from participating in the military, no matter how you think about it, you will soon have connections to the armies of 3 roads. Your calculations are not any less than father's. You underestimate me." Although Fan Bingyun once said that I seem to be conquering the world through conquering women, with 2 roads of armies and the power of the Yi family, I am not stupid enough to want to use 2 female students to influence anything. Fan Xian smiled. "However, I am willing to improve my relationship with the military." As he said these words, Fan Xian's emotions were complicated. He had come to Jingdou and entered the complicated Jingdou officialdom. He had already influenced the world for a full 5 years. His efforts to reach out to the Qing military had all, without exception, come to nothing. Although the emperor's wariness toward him seemed to have lessened greatly and had Li Hongqing, who was on good terms with him, become the general of Dingzhou. If Fan Xian truly wanted to fight his way into the military, it would still be difficult. For example, the Jiaozhou Navy. Fan Xian had once used Su Maocai's help to gradually arrange for his trusted aides to enter. He was prepared to wait for the old Qin family to rebel and then secretly take over the Jiaozhou Navy's power. He had not thought that the emperor would not let go of this slight change and directly knocked Su Maocai into the dust. Although the emperor had mercifully left Su Maocai's life for Fan Xian's sake, the entire Jiaozhou Navy was moving further and further away from Fan Xian's hands. Furthermore, Hou Jichong, who Fan Xian had remained in Jiaozhou, had done 2 years of useless work because of this matter and wasted a great deal of time. It was becoming more and more difficult to advance on the official road. Presently, not only was he far from Yang Wanli's reputation in the Ministry of Works, he was even much worse than Cheng Jialin, who had already become the Suzhou Zhizhou. Hou Jichong was the person Fan Xian admired the most of Fan Xian's 4 disciples. That was why he had entrusted Jiaozhou, such an important place, to him. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian's one wrong move had caused this Jingdou talent, who had once been as famous as He Zongwei, to still be able to endure his official reputation in the remote Jiaozhou. Presently, the emperor's favor and trust toward Fan Xian could not be any greater, but he was still on guard against him entering the military. This reality made Fan Xian's heart beat like a drum. He didn't know if the emperor knew something, or if the emperor often had nightmares about the incident 20 years ago. Additionally, Su Maocai was an old member of the Quanzhou Navy, so he was still wary of his son, Fan Xian. You need to have a good relationship with the military. I don't. The great prince's words pulled Fan Xian out of his thoughts. He forced a smile and said, "But you need to maintain a good relationship with the emperor. As for me, as long as the emperor does not obstruct me, not only do I want to have a good relationship with the military, but Wang Zhikuan and the other military elders also want to have a good relationship with me. If I take his daughter as a student, he will probably wake up laughing in the middle of the night." The great prince raised his brows. He knew that Fan Xian was speaking the truth. In the present Qing kingdom, purely in terms of power and status, there was no one more glorious than Fan Xian. Additionally, everyone knew that he was the flesh and blood of the Qing emperor and the mistress of the Yi family. With this connection, all of the officials and generals would unconsciously curry favor with him. After the two of them finished speaking, they fell silent at the same time. The great prince thought helplessly that it looked like the matter of taking a secondary fei would be difficult to resolve. Fan Xian was thinking, when exactly would the suspicion the emperor had toward him in the depths of his heart be dispelled? Tell me about the matter in the west. The great prince suddenly furrowed his brows and said seriously, "What exactly is going on with the Hu people? There has to be a reason for their great increase in power these 2 years. You'll know when the imperial bulletin comes out in a few days." Fan Xian had long known that the great prince would be unable to resist asking this question. The great prince had fought in the west for many years and was very familiar with the grasslands. He had killed the Hu people until their cries shook the heavens. If the emperor had not been worried that his eldest son's service was too great and could no longer be conferred a title, he would not have moved him back 3 years ago. Although the great prince had long returned to the capital, his heart often floated to the grasslands. He was very concerned about the situation there. The great prince saw that he was not willing to answer and shook his head helplessly. Hongqing has become more and more promising these 2 years. However, the Hu people are ruthless and bloodthirsty. You have to remind him more. After Fan Xian nodded, he suddenly furrowed his brows and asked seriously, "The Qing kingdom and the Western who have fought for decades. Each time, it looks like we have a great advantage and are about to completely resolve the problem. Why is it that each time, the Hu people's power is like wild grass after the spring breeze and grows again?" The great prince had a lot of right to speak on this question. That is because the grasslands are too big. Going west from the southern edge of the sky, there is no end to the grasslands. Once the Qing kingdom has the absolute advantage, they will flee west. How can we completely resolve the problem? This time, I found that the Western Hu court is not particularly far from Dingzhou, Fan Xian asked with confusion. The great prince glanced at him with slight mockery and said, "The Hu people's court is not Jingdou or Shangjing. By the time we attacked there, they had long moved into the depths of the grasslands. It is only because the Hu people are powerful that they dare to move the court not far from the border. Putting aside the years I fought against the Hu people in the west, just talking about 20 years ago, Father personally led the army of the entire country to the grasslands with the intention of wiping out the Hu people in one fell swoop. Unfortunately, in the end it was all for naught, the great prince said with some regret. The power of the entire country, the imperial army personally attacking, and father's genius military ability were still unable to subdue the Hu people in one fell swoop, much less people like us. When Fan Xian heard that the Qing emperor had personally led the imperial army on an expedition 20 years ago, his expression became serious. He didn't reply because he remembered clearly that during that western expedition, his father, Fan Jian, had also followed in the camp. During that time, a shocking change had happened in Jingdo. This change ended a woman's life and gave him a second life. In the arms of the blind uncle. He sat in the carriage and went to Donzhou. The great prince did not notice Fan Xian's strange expression. Slowly, he said, "At that time, the old chief had just passed away and the Hu people were in internal strife. It was the best opportunity for the Qing kingdom. It was truly a pity. What is most puzzling is that at that time, Commander Yi had handed over the Jingdo garrison by imperial edict and personally became the vanguard of the army. The elite cavalry had already followed the western Hu court. As long as father's camp could hold out for another 3 days, they would have been able to capture all of the western Hu nobles in one fell swoop. However, at this time, the army suddenly stopped advancing westward and turned to retreat into the borders of the country, leaving the western Hu people with a breath." Fan Xian was silent for a moment. He then raised his face and smiled slightly at the great prince. "The reason for the army's retreat is very simple. Presumably at that time, the emperor already knew of my mother's death." The great prince's heart trembled. Only now did he think of the important matter that had been sealed away for many years. Looking at Fan Xian's forced smile, the great prince's pity rose in his heart and he did not continue this topic. A moment later, the great prince coughed and changed the topic back to the beginning. "Is taking a secondary fei really not to be stopped? No one dares to disobey the edict. All those who oppose the emperor have not had a good end. Is Wang Tong really a good choice? At least, I can't see a better choice right now. Then, how do I tell Wang Fei?" Fan Xian laughed and said, "You don't need to worry about this problem. Wang Fei has a way to deal with a little girl." As he spoke, someone outside announced that Wang Fei and young lady Wang had arrived. The great prince and Fan Xian met each other's eyes and both smiled bitterly. After the two women entered, Fan Xian stood and bowed. Without anyone noticing, he observed the expressions on their faces and nodded his head in his heart. Wang Fei was as calm and graceful as usual, but Wang Tonger's face was slightly red and shy. It was completely different from her earlier appearance. It looked like after Fan Xian had rushed her to Wang Fei's side, this young lady had received some kind of promise. Fan Xian sighed quietly in his heart. He knew Wang Fei was indeed powerful. She had long made up her mind before these two men had decided. In order to protect her own interests, she had been forced to make a seemingly compromising choice. It looked like he wouldn't need to make things difficult for Wang Fei to persuade her in a moment. Instead, it would be Wang Fei persuading him to think of the big picture and not go against his father's wishes in the palace. Fan Xian smiled and looked at Wang Fei with narrowed eyes. Faintly, he said a few words. Wang Fei also smiled. The two of them knew exactly what the other was thinking. During the Jingdo rebellion, the northern Qi emperor wanted the great prince to take the throne. Through the brocade guard spies he had sent to Wang Fei's side, he had secretly revealed Fan Xian's whereabouts to the eldest princess and almost caused Fan Xian's death. Fan Xian knew that this matter did not have much to do with Wang Fei. For the sake of the relationship between the great prince and his wife, he had never told the great prince about this matter. However, he and Wang Fei still had a knot in their hearts. Thus, during these 2 years, they had not had much contact. Wang Fei had always felt guilty toward Fan Xian. It was not until now, when the two of them looked at each other and smiled like foxes, that the past melted like a spring breeze and disappeared without a trace. After chatting for a bit, Fan Xian rose to say his goodbyes. He had brought the young lady of the Wang family into the manor. Of course, he had to take her out. After all, the palace had not appointed a marriage. No matter how open the Qing people were, if he allowed Wang Tonger, a love-struck fool, to wink at the great prince, it would be too unsightly if it got out. Wang Fei pretended to ask him to stay, but a clear light flashed through her eyes. Wang Tonger foolishly did not want to leave. She looked pitifully at Fan Xian. "Let's go," Fan Xian said. "Teacher, where are we going?" Wang Tong-er raised her head and looked at him in surprise. Wang Tong-er's eyes were filled with anger and refused to speak. Fan Xian's face immediately darkened. For some reason, Wang Tong-er was innately afraid of Sir Fan Jr. She unconsciously stood up and gritted her teeth as she followed Fan Xian out of the manor. Walking along the way, Fan Xian had long seen the light in Wang Fei's eyes. Looking at Wang Tong-er beside him, he couldn't help but shake his head. Although this young lady was unruly, if she truly entered the manor, she would not be Wang Fei's match. She probably would not have many good days in the future. Fortunately, Wang Tong-er's background was powerful enough. Presumably, her life would not be too wretched. His Highness was also not that kind of person. In a moment, the two of them arrived at the front door of the manor. Fan Xian didn't know what magic he used to say to this unruly woman. Wang Tong-er seemed to have completely changed. She obediently and timidly followed behind him. There was no trace of her earlier appearance of stepping on the stone lion and cursing loudly. The front door of the manor opened. The housekeeper escorted them out and then quickly closed the door like he was hiding from a ghost. Fan Xian smiled and scolded, thinking that he had also been caught in the crossfire. In the blink of an eye, he saw Wang Tong-er's face full of anger and was about to curse the housekeeper. His face darkened and he made a sound of acknowledgement. Wang Tong-er immediately felt the coldness beside her and shivered. She quickly closed her mouth and obediently walked down the steps. With unusual discomfort, she said a few things to the old housekeeper with the whip marks on his face. The old housekeeper was frightened. When did his young lady's personality change? To the side, the Wang and Shi family soldiers were also scared silly. They wondered if Sir Fan Jr., who was rumored to be Sir Fei Jie's student, had given the young lady some medicine to make her like this. Wang Tong-er was like a little white rabbit. Everyone at the front of the manor looked at Fan Xian like they were looking at a god. They thought, Sir Fan Jr. truly lived up to his reputation. No wonder the emperor had him pretend to be a tutor a few years ago to teach the third prince. This kind of teaching and educating methods was truly wondrous. The Wang family soldiers and housekeepers bowed to Fan Xian with endless gratitude. They then led their young lady out of the manor's front door. Fan Xian watched the group of people disappear into the street. He then shook his head and climbed into his carriage. Although Mu Feng'er was now the leader of the Qinian unit, in his bones, he was still that meddlesome young man from the past. He swallowed and carefully asked, "Sir, what happened? That mother. How did she become like this?" "It's simple." Fan Xian sat in the carriage and closed his eyes to rest. "If she doesn't listen, I'll spank her. I'll have the king marry another woman. I am an official of Taichung Temple. How could she not believe me?" "That's stupid," Mu Feng'er said with disdain. Everyone knew that this matter related to the great prince taking a fei was not something an official of Taichung Temple could decide. This matter had to be approved by the emperor. If she wasn't stupid, why would the princess allow her to enter the manor? Fan Xian closed his eyes and muttered. He felt incredibly tired. He didn't want to get involved in this kind of thing again. If it weren't for his good relationship with the great prince, he would have gone to the palace long ago to complete his mission, and then returned to his manor to play with his children. An hour passed, and there was still no movement in the imperial study. The eunuch stood helplessly outside the room. Eunuch Yao glanced at the goat milk and pastries that the person beside him was holding. He found that the food was almost cold and couldn't help but furrow his brows. The young eunuch looked at the door of the imperial study, and wondered who His Majesty was talking to for such a long time. Eunuch Yao also glanced at the door and thought it would be best if he did not disturb the father and son talking. Other than the young eunuch who had just arrived, no one else was surprised by the current situation. The emperor had a myriad of affairs to attend to, and rarely summoned an official alone for more than a quarter of an hour. Sir Fan Jr. was an exception. During these 2 years, each time Sir Fan Jr. entered the palace, the emperor would always chat with him for half an hour in the imperial study. It was not limited to matters of state and council. A few times, Eunuch Yao had even heard the emperor and Fan Xian argue about the names of the Fan family's 2 children. There was only Fan Xian in the entire world who had such an honor and such favor. The situation in the imperial study was different from what the eunuchs thought. The Qing emperor looked at Fan Xian sitting to his right and said, "I have already decided. Wang Tong-er will eventually enter the manor. Don't meddle in other people's business." Speaking of marriage, a few days ago, Yan Bingyun married that woman. When are you going to explain the matter of Zhaoshang Money House to me? Fan Xian's expression changed slightly. He quickly lowered his head to hide it. Chapter 6:17. Before I wrote, I looked and found that Wang Tong-er's Sun character showed a different form. Perhaps it was too skewed. Sun means beautiful. Now, it looks like it needs to be changed to Tong. Also, I want to report something to everyone. I am seriously reserving monthly tickets after the 28th because I want to enter the top 3. I clenched my fist and spoke in a low and forceful voice. Fan Xian had been in the royal study for a long time. In the beginning, he picked the most important things to talk about. Presently, what the Qing kingdom cared about the most was the situation in Shiliang Road, and to what extent the plan the emperor had the Overwatch Council prepare 4 months ago had been carried out. Fan Xian spoke confidently and with assurance. The emperor listened quietly. There was not a trace of dissatisfaction on his face. He even said a few rare words of comfort to Fan Xian, saying that he had worked hard. Feeling that the environment was suitable and the timing was just right, Fan Xian's eyes spun. He took this opportunity to say a few idle words about the great prince taking a secondary fey. The gist of this idle talk was completely different from the response he had discussed with the great prince in the manor. He directly used words to humiliate the young lady of the Wang family. At the same time, he expressed his strong desire as an official not to participate in the affairs of the royal family. Just as Fan Xian had expected, the emperor flew into a rage upon hearing these words. He reprimanded Fan Xian, pointed out his identity as an official of Taichung Temple, and said harsh words about the matter of the prince taking a secondary fey. This storm did not make Fan Xian feel any fear. He had been with this unfathomable emperor for a long time. Although he was still unable to see into the depths of his heart, at least he had a clear understanding of his personality and likes. However, such a vigorous scolding often meant that the matter was not serious. As expected, Fan Xian took the opportunity to suggest that since he was an official of Taichung Temple and the emperor was going to marry the young lady of the Wang family to the great prince, he had to think for the sake of the royal family's face. Should he teach the young lady some things? These things were usually done by the old nannies in the palace, yet Fan Xian, a young man, had stolen them. It was unavoidably comical. However, the emperor did not laugh. He directly told Fan Xian not to meddle in other people's business, but he did not get angry. The emperor had probably long known of the story outside the manor, and had long guessed why his favorite son had insisted on not allowing it earlier and what benefits he had asked for. Just as Fan Xian felt slightly more at ease, he heard the words, Zhaoshang Money House. These 4 words were like a deep brand, burning his heart, causing him to lower his head and remain silent for a moment. He knew why the emperor had chosen this moment to have him hand over Zhaoshang Money House. It was because he had gotten used to this kind of sudden thunder over the past 2 years. If it weren't for his thick skin, he would have been struck by lightning in the past 2 years. Was this the so-called unfathomable saint's heart? Fan Xian thought to himself that although the emperor doted on him to the extreme and allowed him to be free and arrogant in the Qing court, he still did not forget to give him a warning from time to time. Yes, this was what a king would do to the person closest to him. He wanted to wake him up so that he wouldn't get carried away and ruin the relationship between a king and his subject, or a father and son. Ever since the Jingdo rebellion, each time Fan Xian had performed a great service for the court or been heavily rewarded by the emperor would always lightly throw out some things or names to frighten Fan Xian and make him understand the position he was in. The stick the emperor used to beat Fan Xian with in court was He Zhongwei and his group of officials. The real thunder that he struck in private was the things Fan Xian had done in secret. Counting carefully, the things that had served as the emperor's thunder these 2 years included the details of Xia Mingji, Xia Qifei's relationship with the Jiangnan water bandits, Fan Xijia's smuggling in the north, the first thunder about Su Maocai's impure intentions, why 13th Wang had sought refuge with Fan Xian, and so on and so forth. Each thunder struck directly into Fan Xian's heart and made his entire body cold. He didn't seem to have any secrets in front of the emperor. If these crimes were truly brought out, they would all result in beheading. He knew the emperor would not bear to use these crimes against him. He was only reminding him. Even so, his entire body was still cold. He felt that the Grandmaster Emperor on the dragon couch could swallow him with a casual breath. Fortunately, Fan Xian was not a normal official. Faced with the emperor's thunder, his way of dealing with it was also unique. He could only rely on his thick skin. He would admit to the crimes that he had to admit to, but he would continue to do what he had to do. In any case, the emperor didn't want to kill him, so he would continue to muddle along like this. However, he couldn't muddle along anymore. Zhaoshang Money House was too important to Fan Xian. Regardless of whether it was the Overwatch Council's expenses, the silver moved to the Yangtze River to repair the embankments, the Hangzhou conference that one hosted, or even the luxurious lifestyle of the entire clan in Qin Garden, they all came from Zhaoshang Money House. Most importantly, Zhaoshang Money House had once hidden millions of liang of silver from the northern Qi emperor. Once it was known, this crime of betraying the country could not be hidden no matter how Fan Xian pretended to be a filial son and wailed. A few lines of cold sweat rolled down his back. 3 years ago, when he had subdued the old man of the Ming family who was not afraid of boiling water, Zhaoshang Money House had been forced to walk onto the stage. He had guessed that this matter would certainly arouse the emperor's suspicions. The Ministry of Revenue had not moved this much silver. The emperor would certainly wonder where the silver in the money house came from. Fan Xian had made a lot of preparations for this secret. He confirmed that he had already cleaned up the accounts in the north. In the past, the emperor had also asked about the source of Zhaoshang Money House's money. At that time, Fan Xian had used the most famous rumor in the world to brush it off. Everyone thought that the mysterious shares in Zhaoshang Money House were the secret wealth that the commander of the Northern Qi Brocade Guards, Shen Zhong, had saved up after decades of operation. Now, the emperor had asked directly. Furthermore, he had mentioned the young lady of the Shen family, who had been married to Yan Bingyun for less than 3 months. He was warning Fan Xian that the young lady of the Shen family had always been under his control, but she had also always been in the emperor's eyes. Don't use the Shen family's inheritance as a bluff again. 2 more lines of cold sweat appeared on Fan Xian's back. However, it was already late autumn and the beginning of winter. Although there was a fire burning in the royal study, it was still cold. The official robes he wore were thick. For a moment, it was impossible to tell. His expression remained valiantly calm. "Your Majesty, what do you want to explain?" The emperor's expression darkened. He was very displeased that this kid still wanted to bluff his way out of such a private conversation. He had no idea that Fan Xian's heart was beating like a drum. He wondered if the little emperor in the north held a grudge against him for wantonly killing northern Qi spies in Shiliang Road, and thus tossed out this secret agreement and used the Qing emperor's hand to kill him. Did northern Qi hate him that much? Were they willing to pay such a high price to get rid of him? Fan Xian's expression could no longer maintain its calm. Sweat beaded slightly on his forehead. He thought, since that little strange creature from northern Qi dared to toss out knives, who knew if he dared to toss out the money house? Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the clear displeasure on the emperor's face. Seeing this displeasure, Fan Xian was overjoyed. If the emperor truly knew the inside story of this matter and wanted to take him down, given his shrewdness and cultivation, how could he be so sincerely displeased? Fan Xian smiled awkwardly and coughed dryly. He then said, "The silver at the beginning of Zhaoshang Money House was indeed not the Shen family's treasure. It was my own private stash." This answer was very clever. If a normal official had heard these words, they would certainly have cursed Fan Xian for being shameless and disgusting. Zhaoshang Money House had millions of liang of silver as its foundation. Whose private stash could be that much? However, when the emperor heard these words, he clearly revealed an expression as if he knew everything. Faintly he said, "As expected. When did Lao Wu give this money to you?" Fan Xian laughed bitterly and replied respectfully, "It was only before I went to Zhongnan that Uncle Wu Zhu knew I needed money." The emperor looked at him and shook his head. Lao Wu is also messing around. Why would he give such a large sum of silver to a child like you? Fan Xian let out a big breath in his heart. He knew that the emperor was, as he had expected, thinking of the old Yi family. However, there was still a strange smile on his face. It was as if he was silently criticizing the emperor for coveting this money. It was also as if he was silently criticizing the emperor for helping him earn millions of liang of silver after he took over the Zhongnan Palace treasury. Yet he was still not satisfied. The emperor clearly saw what Fan Xian's expression was hiding. He angrily scolded him in a low voice. A moment later, he forcefully suppressed his anger and pretended to be unintentional. "This palace treasury was left behind by your mother. Do you think I care about those millions of liang of silver? However, don't spend the silver your mother left you carelessly." Fan Xian did not dare to be negligent. He quickly explained each and every use of Zhaoshang Money House's money. The emperor knew these things very well, but it was always better to explain them clearly one by one. Furthermore, now that he had made it clear, he couldn't bring up old debts in the future. The emperor stroked his beard with satisfaction and nodded his head. Of course, it is good to use it for good deeds. Chen is also someone who can do things. Don't always lock her up in the manor. When she has nothing to do, let her enter the palace to keep me company. Fan Xian thought to himself that he had never locked up his lovely wife. Presently, she was busy managing the affairs of the entire Fan family. Additionally, because of the Jingdo rebellion, it was inevitable that she would develop some conflicting feelings toward her uncle, the emperor. She did not want to enter the palace. Take good care of the matters in the west. The emperor stood and suddenly thought of something. Pretending to be unintentional, he asked, "Where did Lao Wu go?" "I don't know where he went." Fan Xian also quickly stood and said, "I saw him once 2 years ago. This kid always likes to disappear. How did he learn the same temper as Uncle Yi?" The emperor said with a headache. He then waved his hand, indicating for Fan Xian to leave. The door to the royal study was finally pushed open. Fan Xian walked out with a calm expression. Seeing Eunuch Yao waiting to the side, he nodded his head in greeting. Eunuch Yao quickly lowered his body and bowed. Lowering his voice, he asked, "How is your Majesty's mood?" Fan Xian smiled. The dark clouds on his face quickly turned into a patch of sunlight. It was incomparably brilliant, but his mood was heavy. Every time he entered the palace to see the emperor, it was a day of suffering for him. The omnipresent pressure and the sense of authority of an emperor and grandmaster made him very uncomfortable. Particularly, he had to occasionally endure a lightning strike like the one he had today. It was truly unpleasant. When the emperor asked about Wu Zhu's whereabouts at the end, Fan Xian couldn't help but mock coldly in his heart. Of the 2 foreign great grandmasters, one was dead and the other was crippled. Yi Liuyun's existence was clearly not necessary for the Qing kingdom. This figure, whose nature was like that of a wild crane or a leisurely cloud, had truly floated far away after helping the Qing emperor complete the situation at Dong Mountain. It was impossible for him to appear again. Although the emperor had acted naturally when he asked about Wu Zhu, Fan Xian knew that the emperor had always been secretly cautious and on guard toward Uncle Wu Zhu. As for why it was like this, Fan Xian knew very well. Walking along the long eaves of Taiji Palace toward the lofty royal palace, his expression gradually calmed. Private conversations like this in the royal study had occurred many times. From the discomfort he had felt when he first faced the lightning to how he handled it now, Fan Xian had grown a great deal. Standing under the lofty Taiji Palace and looking at the stone steps carved with dragon clouds, Fan Xian took a deep breath and let the cold early winter air quickly enter his chest. The icy coldness was incomparably comfortable. The things the emperor knew were things Fan Xian was not afraid of letting him know. Although the lightning strikes were terrifying, they could not shatter the hard outer shell in Fan Xian's heart. He still had many secrets that he had successfully kept from the emperor, such as Zhaoshang Money House, the death of a few shopkeepers in Qingyu Hall, Uncle Wu Zhu's true whereabouts, and a small workshop slowly taking shape in a small country controlled by Dongyi. For example, he knew that there was a soul in his body that did not belong to this world. For example, he knew how a similar soul had appeared in this world in a moving manner and disappeared in this world in a heart-wrenching manner. These were all things that the omnipotent Qing emperor did not know. These were Fan Xian's trump cards. The emperor also did not know that his 2 greatest cards, the chest and Uncle Wu Zhu, had already left him and had gone somewhere unknown. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the sturdy royal palace across the long imperial road. His gaze went past the city walls and straight through the cold clouds in the sky. It was as if he could see some of the past from many years ago, as well as the bloody and fiery killing 2 years ago. The eunuchs and serving girls walking quietly inside the royal palace looked at the young man under Taiji Palace and quickly lowered their bodies in greeting. In their hearts, they were confused. Why was Sir Fan Jr. in a daze? Fan Xian's gaze pierced through the clouds and seemed to land on the distant snowy plains in the north. It was as if he saw a man with a black cloth over his eyes carrying a chest and walking alone and resolutely toward an unknown wondrous place. Each step of that person broke through countless snowflakes. Each glance saw through endless illusions. Fan Xian smiled warmly in the shadows of the palace. He sincerely wished that Uncle Wu Zhu would be able to find him. This was perhaps the most important thing in his life. Presently, the restaurant with the best business in Jingdo was Xueqi Tavern. Although the owner of this restaurant was no longer the Cui family under the protection of the eldest princess. A long time ago, the Cui family had been uprooted by the Overwatch Council for smuggling to northern Qi. But business here was as good as ever. Students of the Imperial College and scholars from other places liked to visit Audiobook store the most. It had to be known that under the strict crackdown of the 8th Bureau, there had been no aunties carrying children and selling little red books on the streets and alleys of Jingdo for many years. The inn with the best business was the Tongfu Inn. The tofu shop with the most customers was the private property of the Fan family. As for the brothel with the most business and the highest class, it was the Baoyue brothel. Traveling to Jingdo, now that things had changed, often consisted of eating at Xueqi Tavern, staying at Tongfu Tavern, eating a bowl of tofu on the road, strolling into Audiobook store to buy a couple of books, and at night going to Baoyue brothel to embrace a few beautiful women. Without a doubt, it was because of that person called Fan Xian. Xueqi Tavern was the beginning of Fan Xian's legendary life. From Danzhou to Jingdo, his meeting with Crown Prince Jing and He Zhongwei began in this restaurant. Given the status of these three people, Xueqi Tavern naturally had a magical feeling. Of course, the most important thing was that the story of Sir Fan Jr.'s Black Fist had shocked Jingdo. Through countless storytellers, it had spread throughout the world. Tongfu Tavern was the birthplace of Fan Xian's 4 disciples. The other 3 places were Fan Xian's property. Let's not repeat Fan Xian's string of halos, because it is a very tiring thing to do. One only needed to notice this fact to know Fan Xian's reputation and status in the entire Qing kingdom. There were many people who hated Fan Xian, and even more who loved him. But very few people were like the owner of the medical shop opposite Audiobook store, who had such complicated feelings toward him. The medical shop had just been bought and had not yet opened for business. The medicines seemed to be piled up in a messy but orderly fashion. A girl wearing a plain-colored brocade robe was supporting her chin in a daze in the room filled with the smell of medicine. She did not notice that there were already too many random people gathered outside the medical shop. If it weren't for the manor guards and secret Overwatch Council agents blocking them, those people would probably have long squeezed into the medical shop. Master Xueqi's last disciple, the young lady of the Fan family with astonishing medical skills, and Sir Fan Jr.'s favorite sister had finally left Qing Mountain and returned to her hometown of Jingdo. Under the surprised gazes of the Jingdo people and the room filled with a strange smell of medicine, she began to miss certain people. Chapter 6:18. Fan Xian sat in the carriage and thought of the news Tang Zijing had just reported at the palace gates. He felt a bit anxious. If he had known earlier that his sister had returned to Jingdo earlier, he would not have cared about the prince taking on a secondary fei. There was no sound in the royal study. He had long rushed toward the Audiobook store. 3 months ago, he had received Ruoro's letter from northern Qi. Knowing that she could finally leave Qing Mountain and return home, Fan Xian was naturally happy. Following the instructions in his sister's letter, he had won her carefully choose a good location for a medical shop for her in Jingdo. Unexpectedly, after Wanner's picking and choosing, she finally chose the one across from the Audiobook store not far from the Imperial College. Fan Xian thought this was not bad. The 3 siblings could be considered neighbors on the street. He had not expected that Ruoruo would return earlier than the letter had said. Furthermore, according to Tang Zijing, she had only stayed in the manor for a short time before rushing excitedly to the location of the medical shop. During these 2 years, Fan Ruoruo, as Master Xueqi's last disciple, managed all the chores on Qing Mountain. As a Qing person, in addition to being Fan Xian's sister, although she had the silent permission of the northern Qi royal family and the support of Lang Tiao, it was still difficult for her. Other than managing the mountain gate, Fan Ruoruo would often go down the mountain to treat illnesses for the poor people of northern Qi. Her fees were cheap, and her medical skills were brilliant. Additionally, she had a great reputation. Before long, all of northern Qi knew that a kind-hearted and merciful doctor had appeared in the Tiani Dao sect. After receiving a long period of instruction from her brother, this talented girl in Jingdo finally found her life's goal. Once she found it, she became very persistent. Otherwise, she wouldn't have stopped at home as soon as she returned to Jingdo to keep an eye on the progress of the medical shop. Fan Xian rubbed the spot between his brows curiously, wondering whether his sister had become Hua Bianc or Feng Hua. This was the question he had been most worried about in the past. Today, Dongchuan Road was packed with people and was bustling with noise and excitement. Although it wasn't a festival, there were countless people who came to watch the fun. Those who didn't know the inside story would probably think that there was a juggler performing inside. Dongchuan Road was close to the Imperial College. Most of the onlookers were young students of the Imperial College. They stood on their tiptoes and stretched their necks to look inside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the once famous young lady of the Fan family in the capital and see what she looked like. 4 or 5 years had passed. Of the famous talents in Jingdo, one, He Zhongwei, had already entered the court as an official and was extremely popular for a time. The other, Ho Ji-chong, was far away in Jiaozhou and had almost been forgotten. As for the most famous young ladies in Jingdo, Yi Linger had fled far away to Qingzhou, and Lin Wanner had married, so they could no longer be the topic of discussion at the tea table. Presently, the most popular topic in gossip circles was the barbarism of the young lady of the Wang family, the cowardice of the young lady of the He family, and the arrogance of the distant relatives of the royal family in the Imperial College. To quote a comment that Fan Xian had once plagiarized, "Each generation is worse than the previous." But Fan Ruoruo was an exception. Back then, she had been famous in Jingdo for her talent in poetry. Later, she had gained the favor of the Imperial College and entered Ku He's school. She had obtained a good reputation in northern Qi. How could the people of her hometown forget her? At noon, she had just appeared in the medical shop when she was recognized by a teacher of the Imperial College. From 1 to 10, from 10 to 100, it had become the most sensational news in Jingdo. Fan Xian lifted the curtain of the carriage window and furrowed his brows. He looked angrily at the young scholars blocking the entrance to his bookstore and the medical shop that did not have a signboard. He thought to himself that these people were too impetuous, and his face showed some displeasure. Seeing his expression, Mu Fenger said in a low and cold voice, "I will immediately chase these people away." Fan Xian did not comment. Tang Zijing quietly said, "I will go clear the area." Only then did Fan Xian nod his head. These years, he had, with great difficulty, maintained his position in the hearts of scholars and successfully washed away much of the Overwatch Council's dark colors. How could he bear to let Mu Fenger corrupt it? No one knew what Tang Zijing said after he got off the carriage, but the pedestrians and scholars blocking Dongchuan Road immediately dispersed, emptying out a large space at the end of the street. However, when those scholars passed by the black carriage, they all respectfully saluted the carriage, and only then did they silently retreat. It looked like these people knew the identity of the person in the carriage, so they did not dare to slight him, particularly since the scholars already saw Fan Xian as their idol. Additionally, Fan Xian was also a professor at the Imperial College. How could they dare to linger? To be able to make a scholar bow to him proved that Fan Xian was not as simple as a noble. Dongchuan Road quieted down. Fan Xian got off the carriage and suppressed the excitement in his heart. Smiling slightly, he walked into the medical shop across from the bookstore. He didn't have time to see how Wanner had cleaned up the place. His gaze glanced directly in. Unexpectedly, he did not see Ruoruo's face. He only saw the flimsy brocade robe and her slightly thin waist. Fan Ruoruo did not notice the change outside the medical shop. She had long shaken off her absent-mindedness and was crouching in the inner room organizing the herbs. She had also brought back some rare and precious herbs from Qing Mountain in northern Qi. She was thinking about how to store them. Hearing the sound of footsteps coming from behind her, Fan Ruoruo did not rise. Straightforwardly she said, "It's not open yet. If it's not an emergency, please come back in a few days." Hearing this voice, Fan Xian was happy. Adding to the fact that these words contained the heart of a doctor, it made him involuntarily smile with satisfaction. Standing behind her, he said, "If it was really an illness, how could I wait for you to come back and treat it? Perhaps my own medical skills are lacking?" Hearing this familiar yet somewhat strange voice, Fan Ruoruo's body trembled slightly. She immediately recovered her calm and stood up. With her back to Fan Xian, she tidied her clothes. Slowly turning her head, she bowed down and said, "Brother is here." Although she was purposely suppressing her emotions, the brows on her face, the look in her eyes, and the curve of the corners of her lips all revealed the joy in her heart. Looking at the joy on Ruoruo's sister's face, Fan Xian's heart felt an inexplicable pain. He did not understand why and could not make head or tail of it. He stared at his sister in a daze. He looked at this familiar face that he had not seen in many years. He looked at the familiar sense of ice and snow between her brows. It turned into a faint glow in front of him. He gently sighed. Then he took a step forward and gently touched his sister's head. Ruoruo lowered her head slightly and habitually tilted her head. Just like in the spring of the 4th year of the Qing calendar, when Fan Xian had first come to Jingdo and entered Count Sinan's manor, the long-separated brother and sister only needed a few words and a small action to dispel the sense of unfamiliarity created by time. They once again returned to the situation of the active monkey and the sickly little monkey from many years ago. They returned to the bits and pieces of conversation about flying geese from all over the world. Fan Xian found a chest and sat down. Looking at his sister who was still busy, he said, "How did you get here so early? Didn't you also come back early?" Fan Ruoruo replied with a smile. She raised her arm and pressed her sweaty temples together. "There were no delays on the road, so I got here a few days early. You traveled thousands of li south. You didn't stay at home and rest for a few days. The matters of the medical shop will be arranged by your sister-in-law. You just have to ask questions and don't worry about this." Fan Xian glanced at her disapprovingly. He found that although his sister was still thin, she appeared to be in much better spirits. Perhaps it was because she had often practiced medicine in the remote countryside these 2 years. Her skin had also darkened a bit. Even the layer of ice that was commonly seen between her brows had gradually disappeared. Although they often wrote to each other, it was never as thorough as when she was by his side. Fan Xian felt a bit of self-blame in his heart. When she had escaped marriage and left the country, it had all been arranged by him. Looking at his sister, he sighed. He didn't know how she had been these 2 years. The servants in the manor have changed a few times. I don't know a single person. I didn't even have someone to talk to. I sat in the flower hall for a while and thought about coming to the bookstore to take a look. I didn't know that the place you picked was right across from the medical shop. Fan Ruoruo very naturally pulled her brother up to prevent him from damaging the chest she kept the medicine in and said, "If you sit on this medicine, how can it be used by others? Who am I? I am the immortal of poetry. If this gets out, I'm afraid people will pick this chest of medicine to buy." Fan Xian told a very cold joke and then asked in surprise, "Where's your sister-in-law? Where's Cece?" Minister Fan took Lady Lu back to Donzhou to retire and took away half of the servants in the old manor. Additionally, the manor needed people and the servants had to be betrothed. In just a few years, the entire Fan manor had become somewhat unfamiliar to Fan Ruoruo. Fan Xian acutely noticed this. He thought to himself that even Si Xiang, that sleepy girl, had now properly become the wife of a county magistrate. In a few years, Jingdo had changed too much. It was best if Ruoruo didn't get used to it. Sister-in-law and Cece took Tang Zijing to the country estate. Fan Ruoruo glanced at him curiously as if she didn't understand why her brother had asked such a stupid question. "I just entered the city with Tang Zijing today. Of course, I didn't run into them." All large families had their own country estates and mountain businesses outside of Jingdo, much less a large family like the Fan clan. In the past, Fan Xian often played in these estates. For a moment, he had not thought that it would be winter. It should be time to prepare for the end of the year. Warner and Cece, who were in charge of the Fan clan's businesses, were extremely busy. He rubbed the space between his brows with a headache and said, "Your return is a major event. No matter how busy you were, you should have waited in the manor." Fan Ruoruo glanced at him and said without good humor, "You and I both came back 3 days early. Who would have the divine foresight?" Fan Xian patted his butt and rose. His brows raised in delight. "I could at least calculate that you should be hungry right now." The front and back manors of the Fan manor had long been connected. The garden had also been changed. Even the people living inside were different. Fan Xian was still used to living with Warner and Cece in the new manor. His father's old manor was empty. A servant woman had long cleaned up Ruoruo's old room. It was as clean as before. Fan Ruoruo followed Fan Xian through the door and thought of the dozen years she had spent in Jingdo. The rims of her eyes reddened. Fan Xian could not bear to see a woman cry, except of course, for his dead mother-in-law. He hurriedly took Ruoruo to the flower hall. There was no one else in the manor. The brother and sister sat facing each other, toasting each other with wine, stuffing themselves with food, and talking about their lives after they had parted. However, when they talked about the Jingdo rebellion, Ruoruo was incomparably worried. When they talked about the loneliness on Qing Mountain and the gazes of the northern Qi people, Fan Xian's eyes became angry. "How is my brother doing over there?" Fan Xian put down his wine cup and asked. Fan Xizha had been dealing with the businesses in the north. Although the two of them had always exchanged letters and shared information, he still asked out of habit. From his sister's words, Fan Xian knew that Xizha's life in the north had been difficult. Although the northern Qi royal family had not done anything on the surface, they had secretly played some unremarkable tricks. Fan Xian thought deeply for a moment and then said, "An uncut jade is worthless. The northern Qi emperor will not truly turn hostile for a while. Let him stay over there." During these 2 years, Fan Xizha had returned to Jingdou twice. He had also spent the Spring Festival in the 9th year of the Qing calendar in Danzhou. However, the Fan family had been forced to be far apart. It was difficult to gather together. Every time he thought of this, Fan Xian felt very unhappy. The problem was that the emperor could not allow him to resign at such a tense time. His father should not stay in Jingdou. Staying in Danzhou to take care of grandmother was better than constantly worrying about an unfortunate end. Fan Ruoruo nodded. She did not have a sliver of doubt in her heart toward her brother's words. Regardless of whether it was her brother or herself, it was only under her brother's arrangements that they truly had a completely different life from that of other nobles. It was the most fulfilling kind. "I'll rest today and talk properly tomorrow. Lao Wang is not here. There are many things I want to say to someone but have nowhere to go." Fan Xian mumbled a few inarticulate words, venting his rare gloominess. In this world, other than Lin Debao and Wang Qinian, Uncle Wu Zhu and his sister, who had been greatly influenced by him, were the most suitable people to talk to. Fan Xian even dared to say treasonous things to these 4 people. The problem was that Debao was too naive and did not know how to say, and then. Wang Qinian had run away, Uncle Wu Zhu had escaped, and his sister was not here. Yet, she had finally returned. This kind of feeling was very good. It was difficult for Fan Xian to suppress the joy in his heart. He didn't know how much wine he had drunk, but he did not want to take the antidote. Taking advantage of his drunkenness, he lay on the table and fell asleep. Fan Ruoruo looked at her brother, who reeked of alcohol, and shook her head helplessly. She ordered the servants to carry him back to his room, and personally covered him with a blanket. She tidied his long black hair and carefully took out a few needles from his hair, just like a few years ago when Fan Xian had been injured before his wedding. Returning to her own room, Fan Ruoruo looked at the thin needles in her hand that shone with all kinds of light and couldn't resist smiling slightly. She thought to herself that her sister-in-law should also know about these poisonous needles. Was she not afraid that something would go wrong when they were intimate? Or did she have to clean them up every night? She immediately realized that she shouldn't have thought about this question. She secretly blushed and quickly put the needles back into the box. Fan Xian's final life-saving trick had been personally made by the 2 of them in the back courtyard. Naturally, she knew how to deal with it. The house was old, the bedding was new, the people were old, and the things in their hearts were also old. Fan Ruoruo sat quietly by the table and looked out the window at the garden outside. She thought of her brother's drunken and happy appearance earlier and was a little lost in thought. From their conversation, she knew that although her brother had been living happily in the capital these years, there was always an indescribable pressure that made it difficult for him to be happy. She sighed and put on a jacket. She walked out of the room and strolled in the garden under the old moonlight. In the room behind her, the flickering candlelight was looking for a shadow and telling it how bright its dreams were. It was the same moonlight as before, but somehow it made her more and more flustered. But Fan Ruoruo clearly knew that all of this was just an illusion. Regardless of whether or not her thoughts could be accepted in this world, the most important thing was that from many years ago, her brother had habitually taken care of her like a child. In Xueqi's arms, she had never had such thoughts. She couldn't help but smile bitterly and helplessly. She thought to herself that she should quickly open the medical shop. There were still so many pitiful people in the world who needed her help. Why should she think of these childish thoughts that were difficult to express in the early winter? Once she thought of these matters, the moonlight that fell on her delicate face seemed to become calm. Years of living in the north had made this girl's temperament undergo a great change. There was no longer that indifference in her calmness. Instead, there was a sense of calmness that could take and let go. Putting aside what kind of commotion the young lady of the Fan family's return to the capital had caused, the Fan manor had become much livelier. Lin Wanner, who had received the news, hurried back from the country estate. When sisters-in-law met, there was a sense of intimacy. Particularly when she saw her niece and nephew, Fan Ruoruo was endlessly happy. This happy and harmonious family was an anomaly in the Jingdo manor. However, this kind of atmosphere could not be maintained for long because Fan Ruoruo was in a hurry to open the medical shop. The palace also had Fan Xian bring Ruoruo into the palace to see the emperor. Naturally, there were people to handle the matters of the medical shop. Seeing the emperor only took a day. However, the young people of the second generation of the Fan Manor could no longer be idle. Fan Ruoruo had studied in Qing Mountain for many years. This was her first time returning to the capital, so there were many elders and relatives she had to visit. The first stop was, without question, King Jing's manor, which had a good relationship with the Fan Manor. In the past, this kind of visit was common. The problem was that Fan Ruoruo had almost become King Jing's daughter-in-law. Later, she had been sent by Fan Xian to northern Qi to study under Ku He. King Jing had always remembered this matter. Whenever he saw Fan Xian, he would sigh and sigh. The situation between the two families was slightly awkward. When Fan Ruoruo knew she was going to the manor, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. What is there to be uneasy about? Fan Xian looked at his sister's expression and thought of Hongqing suffering in Dingzhou. His heart trembled. He didn't know whether he had done the right thing or wrong thing in the past. Forcing a smile, he said, "During the new year, Hongqing will also return to the capital. Are you going to hide and not see him for the rest of your life?" Chapter 619. Yesterday's moonlight made Ruoruo nervous. Today's monthly votes also make me nervous. There is clearly so much more. I should thank everyone, but thinking of tomorrow, I'm afraid everyone won't have any votes. Alas, starting at noon tomorrow, the monthly votes will double. Please support me. Also, Fan Xian's career as a matchmaker ends today. Although I like it, my days of leisure come to an end because I am about to die of exhaustion. These few days have not been relaxing at all. After King Jing's rebellion in Jingdo, he became more and more silent. Other than weeping at the Empress Dowager's national funeral, he never entered the palace again. His part-time gardener also never appeared in front of the officials again. The manor became the quietest place in Jingdo. This door was only open to a few people, including Fan Xian. Fan Xian tilted his head and placed his finger on King Jing's wrist. His brows furrowed slightly. A moment later, he released his finger. After thinking for a while, he said, "I caught a cold 2 years ago and have long recovered. However, there is something wrong with this pulse. I can't tell what it is." King Jing glared at him and said, "Bull*T. What can you learn from that old fellow Fei Jie? Get out of the way, get out of the way. I don't need the ready-made famous doctor of Qing Shan, so what are you blocking my way for?" The famous doctor of Qing Shan referred to Fan Ruoruo. After Ruoruo entered the manor, she had been particularly quiet because she didn't know how to face King Jing. Hearing these words and being glanced at with a smile by Wanner, she knew she couldn't avoid it. She went forward and curtsied. Then, she carefully took his pulse. Fan Xian suppressed a smile and went to the side. King Jing's body was under the care of him and the Imperial Academy of Medicine. Of course, there was nothing wrong. Earlier, he had just put on a show with the king to let Ruoruo relax. However, King Jing looked at Fan Ruoruo's comforting appearance. It was as if he had seen Li Hongqing and the woman in front of him getting married. His smile was very strange. It made it impossible for Ruoruo to relax. Fortunately, once Fan Ruoruo saw the king as a patient, her expression became natural. A moment later, she furrowed her brows and said, "What's wrong? The king's body is very good. I look old, but I'm in good health. Hongqing takes after me." King Jing squinted at the girl in front of him and said, "Ruoruo, you're not young anymore. If you were in another family, you would have been married long ago. It was your brother who caused trouble in the past and sent you away." Speaking of this, King Jing glared at Fan Xian. Shortly after, he warmly said to Ruoruo, "I have to think about it." Fan Ruoruo's face suddenly turned white. She turned her head to look at her brother, but she didn't know where the shameless Fan Xian had run off to, leaving her alone in this room. In another part of the manor, Lin Wanner sat by Fan Xian's side and said in a small voice, "Be careful. After we return to the manor, I will tear off your skin. Fan Xian shrugged nonchalantly. My sister has never dared to yell at me, unlike you. Lin Wan-er had already given birth to a son. Her greatest wish had been fulfilled. Additionally, she was busy every day dealing with the matters of the Fan clan and the Hangzhou conference. She was extremely busy, but she had gradually developed a dignified and wealthy appearance. Her body was even more well-rounded. However, this princess could never be dignified by Fan Xian's side. Hearing these words, she gritted her teeth angrily and pinched him. You only know how to use words to stab me. It's good to be more active. You're still a little girl. Why pretend to be the mistress of the household? Fan Xian laughed loudly. It's just that the way you cut your throat with a knife in the past is pretty good. This was an old matter of when a son had climbed over the wall and entered the room. Hearing him bring it up, Lin Wan-er couldn't help but feel embarrassed. She also forgot what she had wanted to say earlier. Fan Xian thought for a moment and then quietly said by her ear, I went to Dingzhou to see Hongqing. These 2 years, I've also sent people to keep an eye on him. Although he used to play among the flowers, he is no longer like that now. Do you think there is a possibility between him and Ruoruo? Lin Wan-er glanced at him and thought, in this world, only someone like her husband would have so many strange thoughts. His sister was already so old, yet he was starting to worry. What had he been doing in the past? Didn't you say that if my sister was not willing, you would rather she not marry? She opened her eyes wide and asked curiously, why did you change your mind? No wonder you left her with the prince. Fan Xian felt a headache coming on. If I don't like him, of course I won't marry. The problem is, where in this world can I find a better man than Hongqing? Hearing these words, Lin Wan-er also felt anxious for her sister-in-law. She began to furrow her brows and think hard to see if there were any good families in Jingdou. No matter how she thought about it, she couldn't find a single family based on her sister-in-law's standards. This couple's statuses were noble beyond words. When they handled matters, they were also incomparably intelligent. In some areas, they were somewhat simple-minded. No wonder when they first met in the Qing temple, they looked at each other like tortoises looking at mung beans. After thinking for a while, she still couldn't think of anything. Lin Wan-er was the first to give up and said, if she doesn't want to marry, then she doesn't. Is the manor afraid of not being able to raise a girl? Hearing these words, Fan Xian was very happy. He thought that Wan-er was indeed gradually changing under his influence and was about to break away from the evil feudal thinking. He and his wife huddled together in a corner of the hall, smiling and chatting. In the other room, Cece and a few old nannies were holding a child and talking with Princess Ruojia. Ruojia curiously held the baby and held it carefully. Looking at the baby's cute appearance, she couldn't help but laugh. Her bell-like laughter rang through the hall. The scene was joyful, natural, and intimate. Disturbed by the laughter, Fan Xian raised his head from Wan-er's ear and glanced at Ruojia, who was wearing a red pomegranate dress. His eyes narrowed. It was clearly a somewhat gaudy dress, but on the princess's body, it contrasted with her obedient personality and instead added a few points of brightness and beauty. The princess was no longer young. The 12-year-old Ruojia, who had once shyly and quietly called out, Brother Xian, had already become a big girl. Her personality was as obedient and pleasant as ever. She had a noble status, but she served the prince, respected his concubines, and treated servants well. Her reputation in Jingdou was very good. Who knew how many noble families stared anxiously at the prince's manor, waiting for it to speak? Ruojia had turned 17 this year. Logically speaking, she should have been married a long time ago. However, the emperor in the palace pitied King Jing for being alone in his manor, so he had delayed the matter for 2 years. But it couldn't be delayed forever. King Jing had a son and a daughter. Hongqing was nearly 30, but he still refused to marry and hid in Dingzhou. This daughter had to marry someone. According to the rumors Fan Xian had heard, the palace would appoint a marriage for Ruojia at the end of the year. According to Lao Dai, there were already many dukes' manors and officials secretly wrestling in the palace. They all had their eyes on this marriage. Although taking a princess home would bring many inconveniences and affect one's future, Ruojia's reputation in the capital was too good. No one cared about this. As for his future, Sir Fan Jr. had also married a princess. Was he not also unparalleled in power? Everyone thought this way and did their best to approach the concubines in the palace. Some sharp-eyed and cunning people thought of Fan Xian's relationship with King Jing's manner, as well as the weight of his words in front of the concubines. They thickened their skin and went to beg Fan Xian. Thinking of this, Fan Xian couldn't help but smile bitterly. He gazed at Ro Jia holding the child in a daze. In the blink of an eye, Ro Jia was about to marry. He had been in the capital for 5 years. This change always unconsciously made people at a loss. Who knew which family's son would benefit such a gentle and beautiful princess? Ro Jia carefully held the young master and moved closer to Xueqi. She wanted to see the difference between Fan Xiaohua and Fan Liang's little faces. Perhaps it was because holding a baby made her think of her own marriage, but the expression in her eyes was uneasy and perplexed. Although Xueqi had already been a mother for 2 years and followed Wanner to manage the affairs of the manor, the impudence she had been influenced by Fan Xian had not changed at all. She moved closer to Ro Jia's ear and said something. Xueqi's voice was very low, but Princess Ro Jia's eyes grew brighter and brighter as she nodded repeatedly. I don't know what this girl is up to again. Lin Wanner's eyes were sharp. She saw this scene and reminded Fan Xian. Fan Xian's heart was also beating like a drum. He watched as Princess Ro Jia handed the child to the old nanny, tidied her dress, and slowly walked over. Ro Jia bowed deeply to him and half-crouched on the ground. In a quiet voice she said, Brother Xian. It had been 5 years. Each time the blushing, shy, and incomparably gentle princess said, Brother Xian, Fan Xian would feel numb all over and want to run away. He quickly helped her up with a serious expression and said, Sister Ro Jia, how can I do this? The princess refused to get up. With a rare stubbornness she said, Brother Xian, you have to promise me one thing. Otherwise, I won't get up. You have to say it first and then see if I can do it. Fan Xian looked at Xueqi, who pretended not to have done anything. His heart thumped. He felt that this matter would certainly be troublesome. Ro Jia was slightly embarrassed. Her face reddened. Using a mosquito-like voice she said, After the new year, the palace is going to appoint a marriage. I hope you can make the decision. Fan Xian was startled. How could he make the decision on such a matter? Seeming to guess what he was thinking, Princess Ro Jia said, You are an official of Taichung Temple. How can you not make the decision? Fan Xian tasted bitterness in his mouth. He thought that it was truly not easy to be an official of Taichung Temple. Regardless of whether it was the great prince taking a secondary fei or the princess getting married, he had to waste his brains no matter what. Thinking of this, he felt a great anger toward Ran Xiao-en. Originally, Ran Xiao-en was his good friend and the most capable support of the 3 temples in court. However, the great Grandmaster battle at Dong Mountain 2 years ago had scared Sir Ran out of his wits. Within half a year, he had found another place to work and run away. In the end, the position of official of Taichung Temple was handed over to Fan Xian's hands. Fan Xian was silent for a moment and then said awkwardly, You are a proper princess. Naturally, the palace decides your marriage. How can I interrupt? Ro Jia raised her face. The rims of her eyes were red as she said, Ruoro's marriage, you have a way. Why can't Ro Jia? Does Brother Xian really have the heart to watch your sister marry poorly? Another Brother Xian, and the endless hidden bitterness in her eyes. How could Fan Xian not know what this princess was thinking in her head? He silently groaned. The 2 of them were cousins. It was only after Ro Jia grew up that she gradually gave up on this idea. However, how could the man of a young girl's first awakening of love be easily erased? Even though Ro Jia didn't have any feelings for Fan Xian, she still saw him as the brother she could rely on the most. She was even closer to him than Hongqing. Fan Xian was helpless. He looked at the tears that seemed to be about to fall from Ro Jia's eyes. The cute expression of the little girl under the grape trellis seemed to rise again in front of his eyes. His heart softened. He truly couldn't bear for the palace to randomly appoint a marriage. Immediately, his heroic spirit rose. Fine, fine. Leave this matter to me. I'll pick out all the young people of suitable age in the capital. Separated by a curtain, I'll let you choose yourself. If the palace can choose a wife, I can also choose a good son-in-law for you. Hearing these words, everyone in the room was shocked. They thought this was too improper. Ro Jia's sorrow turned to joy. She smiled happily and bowed again and again to Fan Xian. Then, she carefully stood by his side and pulled on the corner of his sleeve. It was as if she was afraid that he wouldn't keep his word and would run away at any moment. Happily she said, "Thank you, Brother Xian." Lin Wan'er covered her mouth and smiled. She thought to herself that Cece's idea was indeed not bad. Her husband indeed couldn't bear it. Perhaps only a scoundrel like him would think of such a shocking idea as choosing a son-in-law through a curtain. At this moment, Lin Dabao, who had followed a servant to clean up King Jing's vegetable garden, walked in from outside the hall. His body was covered in mud, and his hands were black. Seeing this, Lin Wan'er quickly went to greet him. Her heart ached as she called for someone to fetch water to wash his hands. Unexpectedly, Dabao only stared in a daze at Fan Xian and Ro Jia, who was holding his sleeve. He wondered why this little girl wanted to steal his place. His mood was not good. Pulling Wan'er's hand, he walked to Fan Xian's side and grabbed Fan Xian's other sleeve. Glaring at Ro Jia, he mumbled, "Little Xian Xian, I'm hungry. I want to eat buns." Everyone laughed. Only Fan Xian's expression was extremely helpless. Princess Ro Jia and Fan Ruoruo had grown up together, so their friendship was very good. It was the first time Ruoruo had returned to Jingdo. The two girls had a lot to talk about. By the time night fell, they still hadn't finished. King Jing waved his hand and had the princess leave with the Fan Manor's carriage. It wouldn't be too late to return to the manor after staying at Fan Manor for 5 or 6 or 7 days. 2 days later, Fan Xian took his sister out of the city again. This time, they were going to Chen Garden on the outskirts. The road was long and difficult to walk. Additionally, the newly built Chen Garden had more beautiful concubines with bare chests and stomachs. Each time Wan'er and Cece went, they got a headache. Thus, they were determined not to go. Princess Ro Jia was also determined not to go because she was afraid of the old director. Fan Xian and his sister could only go by themselves. Chen Pingping was an elder. Additionally, he was once Fan Jian's comrade in arms. After Fan Ruoruo returned to the capital, it would be inexcusable if she didn't go to see him. Entering Chen Garden, the scenery was the same, perhaps even better than before. The fire during the old Qin family's rebellion, other than giving Chen Pingping more reasons to ask the palace treasury for silver, did not have any effect. The green rock garden was still the same mountain. The ambushes in the surrounding forest were still as tight as ever. The beautiful women in the garden were still as beautiful as ever. Even the one singing was still Sang Wen's sister. After entering the garden, they exchanged a few words. Fan Xian had wanted to tell Chen Pingping in detail about the emperor's arrangements in Xiliang and the problems in the council. Unexpectedly, the old cripple in the wheelchair waved his hand and stopped him from opening his mouth. It had been 2 years. Ever since Fan Jian retired and returned to Danzhou, Chen Pingping had completely relinquished the power of the Overwatch Council. He didn't even want to listen. Perhaps Fan Xian could understand some of the hidden meaning, but he was still not used to it. When he opened his eyes in this life, the first people he saw were Uncle Wu Zhu and the old man in the wheelchair. From Danzhou until he entered the capital, he had grown up under this old man's careful care and cruel training. Chen Pingping's will ran through his life. It was like the tree in Danzhou's back garden, shielding him from the wind and rain. He was used to Chen Pingping standing behind him and helping him solve his greatest problems. Once Chen Pingping sank into silence, he sank into a slight unease. Chen Pingping grew older with each passing day. The wrinkles at the corners of his eyes grew deeper. Fortunately, he didn't have to deal with council affairs in these 2 years. He could only relax in Chen Garden, so his spirit was not bad. He didn't mind Fan Xian's dim unease. With a slight smile, he chatted idly with Fan Ruoruo. When they brought up Qing Mountain in northern Qi and Ku He's death, he sighed slightly. The old cripple was becoming more and more like a common old man at the entrance of a village, and not the dark monarch who once controlled the world. Even Fan Ruoruo was not used to this kind of change. After leaving Chen Garden, Fan Xian was silent for a long time in the carriage. He then quietly asked, "How much longer can he live?" He had brought Ruoruo here today to visit. He also wanted to use his sister's excellent medical skills from Qing Mountain to confirm the end of Chen Pingping's life. Fan Xian hoped that the old cripple could have a long and happy old age. The director suffered a few serious injuries a dozen years ago. Both of his legs were broken a long time ago, and his meridians are blocked. 2 years ago he was poisoned. Logically speaking, his body is weak and his qi is exhausted. He could be in danger at any moment. Fan Ruoro's brows furrowed slightly. She didn't understand. However, the Imperial Academy of Medicine has treated him well these 2 years. He should be able to hold out for a few more years. Fan Xian didn't make a sound. He took out a few pieces of paper from his clothes and handed them over. The Imperial Academy of Medicine doesn't seem to have such good methods to write out this prescription and take such good care of the old director's body. They are even better than Sir Fei. Fan Ruoruo accepted the prescription and examined it closely. Her heart jumped. She couldn't resist glancing at her brother and said, "This is a prescription from Chen Garden? Doesn't it look familiar? His skill in using medicine to diagnose illnesses is above mine. It is very accurate, without a trace of excess. Furthermore, the technique is very familiar." Fan Ruoruo gently bit her lower lip. She knew why her brother wanted her to look at this prescription. Practicing medicine and using medicine was actually like martial cultivation. Each had its own schools of thought. How long each medicine should be used, what illness it was targeted at, and what technique to use. As long as one had immersed themselves in medicine for a long time, they would be able to smell something. Furthermore, the person who wrote these prescriptions had a close relationship with Fan Ruoruo. Fan Xian closed his eyes and said, "Has it been 2 years since Mu Pang, who taught you medicine on Qing Mountain, returned to northern Qi?" Fan Ruoruo looked at her brother and nodded. She wanted to say something but stopped. Fan Xian knew what his sister was worried about. From a certain perspective, Ku He's disciple, Mu Pang, was his sister's teacher in medicine. She did not want her brother to act against him. "I don't even have time to thank him. Why would I act against him? I just don't understand why, as a disciple of Tianyi Dao, he would come to the Qing kingdom to do these things," Fan Xian said coldly with his eyes closed. To investigate a matter, the easiest way was to confront it in court and question it face to face, particularly if it involved a secret that could not be revealed. On a cloudy afternoon, a black-clothed man wearing a straw hat walked directly up to a 2-story building in the Lotus Pond Square in the west of Jingdo, a place where all sorts of people mingled. Quietly, he entered. With a flip of his hand, a black dagger faintly stretched out and gently placed it across a person's neck. The layout of the room was simple. The person was packing a bag by the bed as if preparing to go on a long journey. He was dressed as a doctor. He felt a chill on his neck, prickling until all the hairs on his neck stood up. He was Mu Peng, Ku He's second disciple. He was the most skilled doctor in all of northern Qi. 2 years ago, under the Great Master's last orders, he had entered deep into the Qing kingdom and thought of every way possible to get close to Chen Pingping. He used his marvelous medical skills to gain Chen Pingping's trust and found an excuse to hide his identity. Although he was a doctor, Ku He's disciple was no ordinary person. For someone to be able to use the noise of the Lotus Pond Square to sneak in and place a knife across his neck without a sound, he knew that the assassin behind him had to be one of the most powerful people in the world. Mu Peng didn't turn his head. No one saw him move, but a ball of powder hit the black-clothed man's face with a puff. This move was incomparably cold and showed great skill. A disciple of Tianyi Dao was indeed not simple. The powder rustled down his straw hat. Fan Xian closed his eyes. He didn't make a muffled sound. He didn't even breathe because he knew that this medicinal powder contained a terrifying poison. In a miscalculation, he didn't swipe the black dagger. Instead, he gently flicked his finger and stabbed a poisonous needle into the back of Mu Peng's neck. Chapter 620. In the blink of an eye, 5 muffled sounds rang out in the quiet second floor. Mu Peng's entire body finally froze and could no longer move. What appeared to be a simple exchange was, in reality, a competition between Fan Xian and the other party in terms of courage and skill in using poison. Mu Peng had lost the initiative, but like a ghost, he had snatched it back. If Fan Xian had any fear of that medicinal powder, he would probably have lost a great opportunity to control the other party. In particular, Fan Xian had used a piece of cloth to wrap up the poisonous smoke that came out of the little porcelain bottle. This was not only a method of using poison, but it also contained a brilliant control of Xueqi, as well as the little tricks at the tips of his fingers. Mu Peng, whose entire body was frozen, faced the messy bundle on the bed and the layer of green cloth that had changed color at the side of the bed. His heart was filled with fear. He wondered who it was that had such great skill in using poison to be able to control him in an instant. Fan Xian took off the bamboo hat covered in medicinal powder and carefully placed it with the changed color cloth. Taking out a flint, he lit it. The poison melted when it came in contact with the fire and was no longer effective. After confirming it was safe, he took off the gloves on his hands. Grabbing Mu Peng by the collar, he carried him to another room. He took out an antidote pill from his clothes and ate it. He still felt a burning sensation in his throat. Fortunately, he had prepared well. Otherwise, he didn't know what would have happened if the medicinal powder had landed directly on his face. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but shiver. Looking at the motionless Mu Peng in front of him, he thought for a moment. Then, he forcefully pried open his lips, crushed a pill and sent it in. In terms of medical skills, I am not as good as you, but in terms of using poison, you are not as good as me. Brother Mu Peng, you've been in the Qing Kingdom for 2 years. It's time for you to say what you want. Fan Xian coughed and sat across from Mu Peng. These words were not feigning elegance. Rather, he was stating a fact. It was just like what he had said to Zhuang Mohan many years ago at the Night Hall Poetry Conference. Now that Fei Jie was far away overseas, Shaoan had died long ago, and the great poison master in Dongyi had disappeared without a trace. When it came to using poison to detoxify, no one could match him. Mu Peng's entire body was stiff and unable to move, but he could clearly feel the drops of poison flowing from the acupuncture point on the back of his neck into his heart. He didn't know what poison it was that was so powerful, but he knew that since the other had fed him an antidote pill, they were prepared to interrogate him and wouldn't let him die immediately. After Fan Xian opened his mouth, he immediately recognized the other person's identity. Other than his sister disciple's brother, who else in this world would dare to boast in front of him? A great doctor? Mu Peng was now able to speak. He looked at Fan Xian with a glimmer of helplessness and sadness in his eyes. Sir Fan Jr., I am just a doctor. Why must you be so forceful? You're not a peerless beauty. Why would I be forceful? Fan Xian shook his head. I just want to know, as Ku He's second disciple, why have you been hiding in the Qing Kingdom these 2 years? Mu Peng smiled slightly and said, Reason? You should know that Director Chen's body is getting better and better, right? Fan Xian's brows were furrowed tightly. This is exactly what I don't understand. The better the old director lives, the harder it is for the Northern Qi people. He suddenly raised his head and looked calmly into Mu Peng's eyes. Is this Ku He's final order before he died? Mu Peng used his silence to represent his acknowledgement. Fan Xian took a deep breath and said, You should know what the 7th Bureau of the Overwatch Council does. The 7th Bureau of the Overwatch Council was responsible for the prison. The most terrifying methods of torture in the world were all in that prison. Hearing this, Mu Peng's expression did not change. Faintly he said, Sir Fan Jr., is this how the Qing Kingdom treats its guests? Your sister studied at Qing Mountain. I, Mu Peng, have taught her everything I know without holding anything back. Even after Dong Mountain, when my teacher handed the entire Qing Mountain to her, the court did not change its attitude. He looked at Fan Xian and said with a smile, Do I deserve to die just because I helped Director Chen nurse his body? No matter how you put it, it doesn't make sense. Fan Xian fell silent. He knew Mu Peng was right. During these 2 years, he had been hiding in the Qing Kingdom. After the Overwatch Council's investigation, he had indeed not done anything. He had only done his best to nurse Director Chen's body. The problem was that this matter itself was very strange. The great Grandmaster Ku He's final order was for Hai Tang to gather the Hu tribes on the grasslands and with Northern Qi support, become the Qing Kingdom's greatest foreign threat. The second was for Mu Peng to head south. Was there some great benefit for Northern Qi to let Chen Pingping continue to live? Fan Xian could not understand this question. That was why he had acted against Mu Peng alone. You prepared to leave. Since my sister has returned, what if I don't leave? Mu Peng said. However, I still left a bit too late and was caught by you. I sensed your existence a few months ago. However, you rarely came down from Qing Mountain in the past, so I was unable to confirm your identity. Ruoro was only helping me confirm it, Fan Xian said with his head lowered. For Ruoro's sake, I won't kill you for now. Before I figure out exactly what Tianyi Dao is thinking, I won't let you leave the Qing Kingdom. Mu Peng's expression changed drastically. He knew he would be imprisoned in the Overwatch Council. However, He didn't know how long he would be locked up. Would it be as long as Xiaoen? So that doctor was Xueqi's second disciple. Xueqi's been a startling talent all his life. Everything he dabbled in was at the pinnacle of the world. No wonder this doctor's skill was so high. In the wheelchair, Chen Pingping smiled and pointed with his index finger. He had the old servant behind him push him deeper into Chen Garden. Fan Xian followed silently behind the wheelchair and listened to the squeaking sounds, as well as the babbling of women singing in the distance. It was already night. The singing began again in the quiet Chen Garden. It made one's heart flutter. I don't care how you deal with it. It's just a famous doctor. Why did you come all the way here? Chen Pingping gently tapped the armrest of the wheelchair. This was his habit for many years. His fingertips tapped down and made an empty sound. In a sharp and raspy voice he said, "In any case, you haven't fed me poison these 2 years." Fan Xian stood with his head down under the tree beside the wheelchair and shook his head. He didn't believe Chen Pingping's words at all. Given Chen Pingping's ability to read people, how could he not see the problem with Mu Peng? He thought for a bit and then said, "I just don't understand why Xueqi ordered Mu Peng to go south before he died." During these 2 years, not only had Mu Peng paid great attention to Chen Pingping's body, he had also, through various channels, organized a large batch of medicinal herbs that were rarely seen even in the Qing royal palace. Combined with his miraculous hands, he had successfully stopped Chen Pingping's aging and old injuries, allowing this old man to live a healthy life. Chen Pingping turned his wheelchair and faced Fan Xian. He waved his hand to indicate for the old servant to leave. He then supported his chin on his hand and sank into silence. The light from the room in Chen Garden shone on his back. Fan Xian couldn't see his old face clearly. He could only see a figure as thick as ink. Xueqi was an extraordinary person. If it is as you say, Haitong's past and the arrangements of Shi who all originated from his plans before he died, then Mu Peng going south to protect my life was also a part of his plan. Fan Xian had come a second time to force his old comrade to listen to a council report for a long time. Chen Pingping said somewhat helplessly, "That old baldy, if he dies, then he dies. Why worry so much? Actually, you should know the reason why Xueqi risked his life to protect my life." Chen Pingping scratched his slightly itchy back. "She who is an external threat to the Qing kingdom. If I live, I will certainly become an internal threat to the Qing kingdom." Although the old man did not directly state his judgment, a chill rose in Fan Xian's heart. After standing frozen for a moment, he walked forward and stood behind Chen Pingping. Gently pulling down the old hand, he helped him scratch his itch. In a quiet voice he said, "During these 2 years, you haven't done anything. The emperor also has some affection for you. Most importantly, there have been many traitors in the court. For the sake of his family's face and the glory of your life as ruler and official, he would not have any designs on you." Fan Xian understood the Qing emperor, so this deduction should not be wrong. The Qing emperor and Chen Pingping had been ruler and official for a lifetime. Their relationship was different. They had known each other for over 30 years and had never had any animosity or doubt. They had done many great things under heaven, and could truly be considered an anomaly in the court. If it was said that Chen Pingping had disloyalty toward the Qing emperor, no one would believe it. If it was said that the Qing emperor feared Chen Pingping's power, no one would believe it. The emperor wanted to set an example for all his officials and leave his image as a benevolent ruler in the history books. If he couldn't even tolerate a loyal dog like Chen Pingping, what would he use to convince later generations? The problem is, no matter what kind of affection, it will gradually fade. Chen Pingping felt Fan Xian's hand moving on his back and sighed comfortably. "Affection is like my pitiful back. After a long time and getting old, it easily dries up and itches. Without new contributions to moisturize it, everyone wants to scratch it." Fan Xian's hand paused. He shook his head and said, "The emperor treats you differently than other officials." "It is indeed different. In this, I am grateful for the emperor's kindness," Chen Pingping slowly said. Chen Pingping slowly said, "But I am also different from other officials. You had your suspicions about what happened 2 years ago, and I listened to your advice and did not continue. But His Majesty also has suspicions about what happened 2 years ago, and he will always feel uncomfortable." Fan Xian was silent. After the Jingdo rebellion 2 years ago, he had been very confused about the role Chen Pingping and the Overwatch Council played in this matter. Afterward, Yan Bingyun had also secretly mentioned these problems to him. Although on the surface, Chen Pingping was relying on the emperor's shocking plan and playing tricks, Fan Xian knew that the situation at the time was truly delicate. Regardless of whether it was Yi Liuyun's sudden betrayal or the emperor's sudden transformation into a great grandmaster, as long as either of these conditions were not met, Chen Pingping could do something that would shock the entire world. During the Dong Mountain incident, I once had some hope and some thoughts. Although I hid these thoughts well and deeply, the eldest princess faintly saw through them. Thus, during the entire Jingdo rebellion, she never paid attention to me. She knew that at the time, our goals were very close. After the matter, Xueqi also saw a little. Thus, before he died, he had Mu Peng protect my life and extend my lifespan. What thoughts? Although Fan Xian knew, hearing Chen Pingping admit it personally still made it difficult for him to suppress his shock. His mouth was dry and he couldn't speak. I didn't think that the emperor would be able to walk down Dong Mountain alive, Chen Pingping said with his head lowered. When I received the emperor's message in Weizhou that day, I sighed with emotion. Why was it so difficult for a person to die? In the end, the emperor only revealed half of his face to me when he planned the Dong Mountain situation. Not only did he include a few great grandmasters in the scheme, but he also almost had me fall into it. Of course, I didn't jump down in a hurry like the eldest princess. Chen Pingping coughed and said, perhaps from the beginning, I didn't think the emperor would die so easily. Fan Xian said in a raspy voice, since you didn't jump and there was no evidence, the emperor would not suspect you. What kind of person is the emperor? He didn't investigate me, but that doesn't mean he didn't suspect me. It was only because he believed in our relationship as ruler and official. Furthermore, he couldn't understand why I would have those thoughts, Chen Pingping said with a slight smile. Chen Pingping said with a smile, but the most important thing is that he knew that I didn't have many years left to live. In order to fulfill the relationship between me and him, and in order to repay me for risking my life to save his life, he gave me a chance to die naturally. If I die of old age or illness, regardless of whether he suspects me or I suspect him, it will all become matters of the past buried in the soil. After I die, I will enjoy honor and glory. The emperor will grieve for a few days, relax, and let everything go with the wind. Isn't that the best ending? Chen Pingping solemnly said. I have to admit that this is the emperor's kindness to me. This is the best ending he has chosen for me. Thus 2 years ago you told me to let go, so I let go and waited for the day I died of old age. But the problem at hand is... A glimmer of absurdity appeared in Chen Pingping's smile. Contrary to my and the emperor's expectations, my tattered body has survived until today. If nothing unexpected happens, it seems I can live for a few more years. The longer I live, the more uncomfortable the emperor's heart will be. There will come a day when he will come face to face and ask me some stories. Wasn't Xueqi waiting for this to happen before he died? At this point, Fan Xian had nothing else to say. If the emperor truly sensed and believed Chen Pingping's disloyalty, it would certainly be a great upheaval in the Qing court. Sandwiched between the two of them, he couldn't just watch as Chen Pingping died. The Qing kingdom would certainly fall into chaos. Xueqi's foresight before his death was deep and sinister. Among the complicated matters of the world, he had accurately grasped the only crack in the Qing kingdom's future. It was truly impressive. He knew what Chen Pingping said was correct. The emperor had shown Chen Pingping enough kindness. If Chen Pingping died of natural causes, the emperor would not feel any guilt and would no longer care about the thoughts Chen Pingping once had in the Dong Mountain matter. It could truly be said to be a happy ending for everyone. However, Chen Pingping lived unhealthily. It was impossible for Fan Xian or the emperor to gently persuade the director, who had given his entire life to the Qing court, to die earlier. Once you die, the Qing kingdom will be at peace. I seem to be a person who should have died a long time ago. Chen Pingping pressed his dry lips together and faintly said, it is only when death is at hand that I realize that I am still afraid of death. As the founder of the Overwatch Council, Chen Pingping, who countless people feared upon hearing his name, would admit to being afraid of death. If outsiders heard this, they would probably be very surprised. Fan Xian only listened quietly. He was someone who had died once. He knew what an unbearable process it was to quietly wait for death to come. Decades ago, the lands were in turmoil. In the north, there was Xiao En, and in the south, there was Chen Pingping. Even these two most powerful figures in the world of darkness appeared weak and small in the face of death. When Xiaowen died, Fan Xian had been at the side to send him off. At this moment, he looked at the skinny old man in the wheelchair and thought sadly that no matter how the situation developed in the future, he only hoped that when Chen Pingping passed away, he could be at the side of this lonely old man who had no children and send him off. The emperor will not be as ruthless as Xueqi wishes. Fan Xian suddenly thought of something and said with a smile. The emperor's personality has changed a lot. Even if he was once suspicious of you, these 2 years have proven that you have no intentions of anything else. He won't do anything. Chen Pingping also smiled and patted the hand Fan Xian placed on his shoulder. The emperor has already been extremely benevolent toward me. I have nothing to worry about. Even if I can live a few more years, so what? It's not like I can live longer than the emperor. With these words, Fan Xian's mood finally relaxed a little. Suddenly, his heart jumped. From the darkness by his feet, he plucked a little yellow flower that had bloomed tenaciously in the winter wind and carefully pressed it into the white hair at Chen Pingping's temples. Chen Pingping chuckled. Fan Xian bid farewell and left. Until the end of the conversation, Chen Pingping did not say why he had thoughts of disloyalty toward the emperor. Fan Xian also did not ask. He knew the reason for all of this, but he did not know what he should do after everything was clear. The old servant walked out and pushed Chen Pingping around the garden. After a long time, Chen Pingping suddenly sighed faintly and said, Xueqi has lived for too long and knows too many things, which is why he decided on this plan. Fortunately, as Fan Xian said, the emperor will control his temper and wait for me to die of old age. However, he turned and furrowed his brows. Do you think, when Fan Xian holds my body and cries, will he blame me for lying to him and using him? Regardless of which angle one looked at it from, the emperor would maintain ample patience toward Chen Pingping's death. As Fan Xian thought of this, he faced the cold night wind and walked out of Chen Garden. Having resolved a big problem in his mind, he felt his entire body relax. At this moment, the singing of a songstress in Chen Garden floated out of the night wind. It was particularly mournful and clear, but it continued to rise without falling. It was stubborn and persistent, very much like the little yellow flower Fan Xian had plucked earlier. It was also very much like the old man who lived in the garden. In the bone-piercing cold wind, Fan Xian couldn't resist stamping his feet. In the November weather, it was impossible for the sun to rise at this time. The bitter cold seeped into his leather boots and froze his feet numb. Fan Xian did not understand. The winter sun came out late. Why couldn't the time for court be moved back a little? However, this was a 1,000-year-old rule inherited from the Wei kingdom. Even with his current power and influence, he had no way of changing all of this. He looked at the darkness around him. There were a few red lanterns that flickered between light and darkness. He thought to himself that it did indeed feel like a ghost movie. Today was the day of the court conference. Following court custom, the civil and military officials climbed out of their warm beds in the middle of the night and came to stand guard in front of the palace doors. There were many people acting out a ghost movie with Fan Xian, who the scholar was also stamping his feet beside him. He had no dignity at all as the foremost civil official in court. The emperor's benevolent edict allows you to enter the palace in a sedan chair. Why are you standing here with me? Fan Xian hugged the warm stove and exhaled white steam. Lowering his voice, he chatted idly with Hu the scholar. Now that the old scholar Xu Wu had completed his task of passing on knowledge and retired with honor, Hu the scholar was the head of the Hall of Governmental Affairs. Although the scholar was healthy, the emperor thought that he was getting on in years, so he allowed him to enter the palace in a sedan chair. Hu the scholar glanced at him meaningfully and smiled slightly. With you standing here, no one dares to come up and talk to you. Do you not welcome me? Fan Xian paused and immediately smiled bitterly. His father-in-law's civil official power in court had been broken up by the emperor. The Overwatch Council had also been ruthlessly investigating the governance of officials. Although the officials in court respected him and would respectfully greet him when they saw him, not many dared to stand by his side. As he thought this, a red lantern floated out of the darkness. Under the guidance of a servant, Sir He Zhongwei, the imperial censor of the left of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, came in front of the two of them. With a calm expression, he lowered his body and bowed. The red lantern light shone on this young official's face, revealing some sincerity and gentleness. However, Fan Xian's eyes narrowed. Chapter 621. Presumably, the officials already knew what kind of person He Zongwei was. Although the old grudges between him and Fan Xian were already very distant, given Fan Xian's vengeful personality, how could he not imprint this person's name deeply in his heart? Greetings, scholar. Greetings, little duke. He Zongwei was neither servile nor overbearing. With great steadiness, he lowered his body and bowed. The scholar chuckled and said a few idle words. He raised his arms, indicating that he did not need to be so polite. Fan Xian only stood to the side and looked calmly at the young official. Countless scenes flashed through his mind. At the beginning of the 7th year of the Qing calendar, the military ambushed Fan Xian in the valley, giving the emperor a chance to change the court with new blood. There were 7 young officials who entered the palace that day. They were called the 7 gentlemen by the people. Of the 7 gentlemen, Qin Hang had participated in the rebellion and had already died. Yan Bingyun peacefully worked in the Overwatch Council and was only waiting to take over Fan Xian's position as commissioner. He Zongwei was the most trusted of these new blood and had risen the fastest. After the Jingdou rebellion, Fan Xian, the great prince, and Yi Zhong were the most meritorious. The problem was that these 3 were already at the top of the nobility. The emperor could not give them titles or reward them. However, because of this matter, He Zongwei received the emperor's favor and rose 3 ranks in a row. Like a rocket, he entered the center of the court's politics. This kind of promotion speed was truly unusual. Perhaps only Fan Xian, who had just entered Jingdou, could surpass him. It was not just Fan Xian who knew. He Zongwei himself knew. In reality, everyone in court knew that this person's promotion and the emperor's trust and delegation of power were just the emperor's naturally created power to balance Fan Xian. This was not because the emperor had any misgivings toward Fan Xian. For a powerful official like Fan Xian, if there was no one in court to keep him in check, there would always be problems. Although He Zongwei had entered the Hall of Governmental Affairs, he still held the position of Imperial Censor of the Left and reported to the emperor. The Imperial Censor's power grew greatly and put great pressure on the Overwatch Council's power. During these 2 years, the Overwatch Council and the Imperial Censor had fought countless cases. The situation between the 2 sides was very tense. It also kept the 8th Bureau's law department headed by Song Shiren and Chen Buochong busy. The law department was a new Overwatch Council yamen that Fan Xian had set up on a whim. It was to deal with the Imperial Censorate's most glib-tongued Imperial censors. From this, it could be seen that Fan Xian did not like He Zongwei. He had overthrown his father-in-law and opposed him at every turn. Most importantly, under his upright and serious face hid an opportunistic heart that he hated the most. The name, Slave of 3 Surnames, had come from Fan Xian's study. The main door of the Imperial Censorate had been kicked down by Fan Xian. Everyone knew that Sir Fan Jr. despised He Zongwei. Each time they met in court or in the yamen, He Zongwei still maintained absolute respect for Fan Xian. It was as if he didn't know about this matter. It was as if the 2 of them still felt the same way when they first met in Yisher Tavern. As the saying goes, one does not hit a smiling person. As long as the other party did not touch his bottom line, Fan Xian would not humiliate him harshly. However, it was He Zongwei's smiling attitude that made him secretly wary. It was impossible for such a petty person, who could summon clouds and rain with a flip of his hand, to make him suffer in the open. But, who knew what he would do in secret? He Zongwei seemed to see that Fan Xian did not want to talk to him. He smiled helplessly and bowed again to the 2 of them. He said a few more things in an even voice and then followed the red lantern back into the darkness below the palace walls. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at the lantern until he could no longer see the person's face. Only then did he gently let out a breath. The scholar looked at him warmly from the side and said, "Sir, his royal favor is steady, but he is not someone without a sense of propriety. He is only handling the dispute between the 2 departments." Hearing the scholar speak on He Zongwei's behalf, the corners of Fan Xian's lips twitched. He jokingly said, "If you had to marry your precious daughter to him, would you be willing?" The scholar coughed repeatedly. He pointed at Fan Xian with both amusement and anger, unable to speak. No one knew when, but there was a trend for late marriages in Jingdou. Even if the palace did not like it, it could not be changed. For example, The heir of King Jing and He Zongwei were both men of their own age, yet they were still alone and did not wish to marry. Speaking of that girl in my family. Hu the scholar suddenly smiled slightly. And Ji, I heard you have taken the young lady of Governor Wang's family as a student. Since it is so, you don't mind having another one in my family, do you? Fan Xian immediately remembered that he had taken Wang Tong-er as a female student. This matter had already become reality after the dispute with the emperor in the royal study. At that time, he had been pleased with himself and retreated in order to advance. He had had the emperor give him the entire matter of the great prince taking a secondary fey. Hearing Hu the scholar's words, only now did he know that he had caused another problem. He repeatedly waved his hand and said, "What are you saying? The scholar is extremely knowledgeable, and your daughter is exceptionally intelligent. What need is there for a useless person like me to do?" Seeing his straightforward refusal, Hu the scholar smiled and thought, if you are useless, then who in the world isn't useless? He couldn't help but feel it was a pity. All of the civil and military officials in court knew that Sir Fan Jr. was a master in the world. He had taught the stubborn and mischievous third prince to become the gentle gentleman he was now. He had taught the young lady of the Yi family, who had once dominated Jingdo, to become a gentle Wang Fei. He had the reputation of being an immortal poet and a 9th-level martial artist. Even Hu the scholar was willing to send his daughter to his manor. Of course, it was not to be a concubine, just to be a female student. Fan Xian turned the topic back to his earlier words and said with a smile, "You are not willing to marry your daughter to He Zongwei because you know his intentions are not righteous. Why should I feign civility with such a despicable person?" Hu the scholar sighed helplessly. He thought that in the present court, only Fan Xian would criticize He Zongwei so viciously. However, he still did not understand why Fan Xian looked down on He Zongwei so much. Speaking of the things that happened in the past, it was actually the emperor who had single-handedly facilitated them. In the end, this matter could not be explained. Fan Xian's fear and disgust toward He Zongwei came from many aspects. It was still early, and there was nothing to do, so Fan Xian and Hu the scholar began to chat idly. Ever since Xu Wu had retired, Fan Xian was surprised to find that Hu the scholar was like old Xu. They were both interesting people and not at all inflexible. Additionally, during the Jingdo Rebellion, Fan Xian had received a great deal of friendship from Xu and Hu the scholars. The old and the young usually interacted on official matters and got along well. Their relationship had also grown closer. Fan Xian gathered with the two of them and talked about Hu the scholar's new culture movement. Although this matter ended without any problems, it was the proudest thing in Hu the scholar's life. It was even more so than entering the Hall of Governmental Affairs. Fan Xian was also a disciple of the headmaster who had been baptized by the May 4th movement. He spoke happily. His laughter pierced through the silence below the palace walls. In the darkness below the palace doors, countless red lanterns were actually all looking up. Many people wanted to participate in the conversation between the head scholar of the Hall of Governmental Affairs and the Duke, but they knew they did not have the right. As for laughing while waiting for the court conference, only these two people had the courage. A moment later, Fan Xian straightened his body and suddenly felt that the atmosphere around him was strange. His brows furrowed slightly and he sighed. Hu the scholar glanced at him and knew that he had understood something. He smiled slightly. Fan Xian had never known that after the emperor quelled the rebellion, there had been a moment when he had considered the question of having him succeed the throne. Although the emperor had resolutely erased this thought from his mind afterward, he knew the emperor's initial arrangements for the Qing kingdom's court politics. He used He Zongwei's imperial censorate to balance the Overwatch Council's power. Hu the scholar then led the Hall of Governmental Affairs to stabilize the court. Such an arrangement could ensure 20 years of peace in the Qing kingdom. However, Fan Xian's power was too great. Furthermore, he was on good terms with Hu the scholar. The emperor's arrangements could not be carried out. He could only raise He Zongwei into the Hall of Governmental Affairs. The emperor's intentions are clear, Hu the scholar said warmly. He does not want the officials below him to be like fire and water. At first, sir, he came to pay his respects with the intention of easing things. And Ji, you are a clever person. You should know what to do. Fan Xian fell silent. His handsome face appeared incomparably calm under the illumination of the lanterns. A year and a half ago, He had kicked open the Imperial Censorate's doors and cursed a dozen Imperial censors under He Zongwei to the point of death. The world only knew that Sir Fan Jr. was incomparably arrogant. Little did they know that afterward, he had also been cursed by the Emperor until his face turned green and white in the royal study. This matter proved the Emperor's protection of the Imperial Censorate, and the price he was willing to pay in order to maintain this balanced situation. From that day on, Fan Xian knew what he should do. He had always done this. As long as He Zongwei did not go too far, he would not be ruthless. Other than establishing the law department and making the Imperial Censorate extremely uncomfortable, he had not used any truly powerful tactics. All of this had to be built on the premise that Fan Xian could endure it. If He Zongwei did something he could not endure, given his blood connection to the Emperor and his present true power, even if he killed someone like He Zongwei with one strike, what could it do? Would the Emperor bear to have his illegitimate child pay with his life for an official? The scholar looked at the darkness under the palace doors and faintly sighed. He felt worried for He Zongwei. He immediately thought of the Emperor's intentions the night before, and involuntarily furrowed his brows. According to common sense, although He Zongwei could not be considered a pure and good person, the past matters were all the Emperor's edict. Thinking about it carefully, Sir He was actually not bad. If Sir Fan Jr. was willing, the Emperor's suggestion could actually pacify the dispute between the two councils. All of this would depend on whether or not Fan Xian was willing. The scholar turned his head and glanced deeply at Fan Xian. Fan Xian was wondering if the scholar's words were a message the Emperor had asked him to pass on or the attitude of the Hall of Governmental Affairs. Immediately after, he furrowed his brows and thought that although He Zongwei was usually very respectful toward him, he had never been as docile and calm as he was today. He did not have any temper at all. All of this actually stemmed from the excessive power in Fan Xian's hands. An illegitimate child of the royal family. The Overwatch Council was in his hands, and the palace treasury could not be separated from him. Such power was too exaggerated. Fan Xian thought of the Emperor's thoughts and couldn't help but feel angry. Was it also a sin that his good character and family background were good? After the court conference ended, there was a routine small conference. In the end, the Emperor, the Great Prince, the Third Prince, and Fan Xian had an even smaller private family conference. Fan Xian walked out of the tall palace walls and apologized to the housekeeper of the Hu Manor, who had been waiting for him with a warm smile. He said that something urgent had suddenly happened in the manor, and that the drinking would have to wait for another day. Sitting in the carriage heading back to the manor, Teng Zijing found that the young master's mood seemed to be very good. His eyes were constantly smiling, and the corners of his lips were constantly curved like the moon. Thinking of the matter his wife had been rushing him about recently, he carefully asked, "Young master?" Fan Xian turned his head and glanced at him, listening to his most loyal servant speak quietly. After listening for a while, he finally understood. The Teng family had seen that some of the people in the manor had used the Fan family's prestige to go out and become minor officials. His heart was also itching. In the present Fan manor, all the miscellaneous matters were basically handed over to Teng Zijing and his wife. Having this thought was something Fan Xian had long expected. He looked at Teng Zijing and said with a slight smile, "Today is the 9th year of the Qing calendar. Since you are already 5 years late, there is no point in you going out." Teng Zijing did not understand the young master's enigmatic words. He smiled awkwardly and kept his mouth shut. Returning to the manor, Fan Xian lifted the lapel of his robe and entered with the wind. He still maintained the warm and friendly smile on his face. All of the servants and women looked at this scene and felt happy. Fan Xian was used to buying people's hearts. Furthermore, everyone in the manor was proud of him. Seeing the young master happy, these servants were also happy. The third housekeeper followed Teng Zijing and Fan Xian into the garden. In a quiet voice he said, "The young lady of the Wang family has come. I heard she wants to formally take him as a teacher." Looking at the young master's mood, it should be approved. What should we prepare? Teng Zijing's face didn't turn. Like Fan Xian, he smiled mysteriously and said, "The young lady of the Wang family is in trouble today." "Why?" the third housekeeper asked in surprise. Teng Zijing's face darkened. "The young master's mood is terrible today. Unprecedentedly terrible. No wonder he was a clever person who had seen Fan Xian's glorious future in Danzhou. No wonder he was Fan Xian's trusted aide who had followed him the longest." The situation developed as Teng Zijing had expected. Not long after Fan Xian walked into the study with a smile, the unruly young lady of the Wang family ran out of the study crying. Wang Tong'er cried and cursed loudly. She looked wretched. No one knew what Fan Xian had done to her to anger people and gods. The young lady seemed to feel that the study was not a place for people to stay. She covered her face as she walked, tears dancing in the air. Her tears had become a poem, and it was in the pear blossom pose. Behind her, the commander of the Jingdo garrison, Xueqi, who had specially taken time off to come, also walked out of the study angrily and headed out of the manor. He muttered to himself as if he hadn't expected Fan Xian to not even give him face. Tang Zijing looked at the dumbfounded third housekeeper and said, "Don't ask me. I also don't know what happened in the palace." Waiting for the news, the women of the Fan Manor hurried toward the study. Only on the way did they learn that in the study, Fan Xian had harshly taught Wang Tong'er a good lesson. In the end, he was even going to use a whip. Everyone was shocked. This time, they had offended the Yanjing faction of the military, particularly a major figure like the commander of the Jingdo garrison. For the matter of Wang Tong'er entering the manor, he had personally come. He had given Fan Xian enough face. Who would have thought that Fan Xian would not leave any face for the other party? The smile on Fan Xian's face was strange. He gazed at Wan Cici and Princess Rojia in the study and said, "Nothing happened. This was agreed upon beforehand. Entering my door, you have to take 2 whips to make up for your past sins." Lin Wan sucked in a cold breath. She wondered if her husband had lost his mind today. The so-called return of the whip was just a joke. How could it become real? Fan Xian withdrew his smile and quietly said, "It's not a joke. It's an ethical matter. Such things need to be respected." "But, you still can't do it in front of General Shi." Lin Wanner glanced at him helplessly. She had cleverly guessed that something must have happened in the palace for Fan Xian to vent his anger on Wang Tong'er's head. There was only one person in the world who could make Fan Xian angry, and make him unable to vent it outside the manor. "These words were told to me by that good uncle of yours." Lin Wanner was angry and said, "That's your father." The husband and wife were talking about the emperor. Although everyone knew Fan Xian was the emperor's illegitimate child, no one dared to say this truth. Fan Xian and his wife had said it smoothly in bed, but there were other people in the study, particularly Princess Rojia. Her face was full of awkwardness and she didn't know how to respond. Lin Wanner sighed. She knew she had said something wrong. She went forward and quietly said, "What exactly did the emperor say to make you so angry?" Fan Xian sat down with a headache. Shaking his head with a pained smile, he said, "The emperor wants to appoint a marriage for Ruoruo." Rojia's eyes turned and she said with slight joy, "This is a good thing." Fan Xian glanced at her and said, "You think it's still going to be appointed to your brother this time?" His expression darkened. "The emperor asked me privately today. It looks like he wants to appoint Ruoruo to his own way." After these words were said, the entire room was shocked, silent, and tense. Lin Wanner's heart was beating very fast. She was afraid that Fan Xian would do something in his anger. Her brows furrowed slightly and she rushed to say, "How can this be done?" These words were not to touch Fan Xian's hair. Due to Fan Xian's influence, everyone in the Fan Manor looked down on his own way, particularly Lin Wanner. On one hand, she remembered the fall of her father in Wuzhou. On the other hand, she had learned from Fan Xian that He Zongwei had once had thoughts about Ruoruo. Back then, He Zongwei had been a Jingdo talent. It was not wrong for young people to admire Ruoruo. However, Fan Xian felt incomparably disgusted. After the meeting in the royal study, the emperor had spoken of his intention to appoint a marriage. Fan Xian had been angry on the spot and had a big argument with the emperor. In the end, the emperor had used the position of ruler and official and the relationship between father and son to forcefully suppress it. He Zongwei. His character is not very good. Rojia hoped that Fan Ruoruo could become her sister-in-law. No matter how one looked at it, she had to fight for her brother, Hongqing. Fan Xian listened to Rojia's soft voice and red-faced criticism and couldn't resist a laugh. His mood actually improved a lot. The emperor would not think that Sirhe's character is not good. Fan Xian's expression calmed. In the emperor's eyes, He Zongwei is a talented person. He is also a high official and noble. He is also loyal to the emperor. Of course, he is a good match for Ruoruo. Actually, if one cast aside their prejudices, Many people would think that Xueqi and Fan Ruoruo were a match made in heaven. Everyone knew that He Zongwei was only working for the emperor and was a very loyal official. However, there was one thing that Fan Xian still did not understand. When he was in Qingzhou thinking about the matter of the great prince taking a secondary fei, he had thought that the emperor trusted and favored him greatly. He also knew that he had beaten Hongqing into a lewd person for Ruoruo's marriage, so he probably would not forcefully arrange a marriage to seduce him. However, the emperor now had the intention of marrying Ruoruo to He Zongwei. What exactly was he thinking? Since the emperor is asking you privately, he knows you will certainly object. It is only a test. Lin Wan'er immediately calmed down and began to analyze everything. You shouldn't have resisted the emperor. It's not like you don't know the emperor's personality. The more you object, the more he wants to do this. I am just angry that the emperor would be so muddle-headed. Did he think that by forcefully arranging this marriage, the court would be peaceful? Fan Xian woke from his thoughts. A ray of light flashed through his mind. It was as if he had faintly grasped something. His eyes narrowed slightly and a cold light flashed through them. His voice was pressed into a cold line. I don't care about He Zongwei. If he actually dares to come to my door and ask for my hand in marriage, I will cut him in half. In one night, 1,000 votes became a poem. I couldn't help but want to stand by the shore and sigh. Everyone is truly extremely flirtatious. Shamelessly asking to be bestowed monthly votes as wine in the pot, to get drunk and flirtatious to the end. Chapter 622. Hearing Fan Xian's cold words, Lin Wan'er's heart froze. She knew that her husband, who had remained calm since returning to the manor, was actually extremely angry in his heart. She gently placed a bowl of warm tea in front of Fan Xian and said evenly, Ruoruo is still in the medical shop. Why don't you have her return to the manor in a few days and not show her face outside? Fan Xian shook his head and said, Presently, my sister regards the practice of medicine as more important than anything else. Don't disturb her with this matter. I will handle it myself. If He Zongwei is relying on the emperor's edict and wants to get close, then that is exactly what I want. Rojia's mind was spinning. She only wanted to return to the manor to see her father, and then have him enter the palace to handle this matter. She rose, bowed, and quickly left the manor to return home. After she left, Fan Xian and Wan'er met each other's eyes. You are too cunning. You purposely said this in front of Rojia. Isn't this forcing King Jing into the palace to argue? The king has not entered the palace for a long time. I am forcing him into the palace for the sake of the brothers' harmony. The emperor should be thanking me, Fan Xian said as he shook his head. There was a glimmer of anger in his words. Lin Wan'er furrowed her brows and said, But, Uncle Emperor knows that you will not agree to this marriage. Fan Xian was a little lost in thought. He sighed and said, These 2 years, the emperor has truly favored He Zongwei. He truly hopes that I can get along with the imperial censorate peacefully. Furthermore, he thinks that since Ruoruo doesn't like Hongqing, then she should like He Zongwei, the great genius. He doesn't have any bad intentions. There were many examples of good intentions doing bad things. Even someone as wise as the Qing emperor was no exception. Fan Xian could empathize with the emperor's intentions, but he couldn't resist his disdain for that toad. Thus, the most disdainful words in history were born. A cup of tea went cold. Fan Xian touched his hair. There was no longer a glimmer of anger on his face. The emperor has given me harsh words. He wants to protect He Zongwei. I don't want to have a falling out with the palace at this time. Furthermore, whenever He Zongwei runs into me these 2 years, he acts like a grandson. I can't find a reason to act. Wan'er quietly said, The emperor only hopes that you and Xueqi can get along peacefully in court. I didn't think he would touch your reverse scale. I'm not the son of heaven. I'm not a dragon. I don't have any reverse scales. For the sake of Ruoruo's marriage, I made such a big fuss back then and even moved Xueqi to the Qing kingdom. If His Majesty thinks he can control my life and my surroundings, then he's wrong. Fan Xian said with slight mockery, The emperor truly thinks highly of this marriage. If I resist to the end, he will have no choice but to withdraw the edict. However, the crime of resisting an edict is not light. Who knows what he wants to take from the Overwatch Council or the palace treasury? In reality, Fan Xian had misunderstood the emperor's intentions this time. Although the emperor of the Qing kingdom was the most powerful man in the world, he was only a commoner. After learning of Fan Ruoruo's return to the capital, the emperor's heart jumped. Naturally, he thought of He Zongwei, who was still unmarried. He thought that King Jing's side had long been hopeless, so he was willing to let His Highness's officials have a good match. He Zongwei was an older man, and Fan Ruoruo was an older woman. The emperor thought he was doing a good deed. He only lightly asked to see if this matter could be carried out. He thought Ji would be able to understand his intentions. Unexpectedly, his reaction was to clash head-on in the royal study. The emperor was already showing mercy by not punishing Fan Xian for the crime of roaring in front of the emperor. He could not understand. Ji, you are a loyal official, and He Zongwei is also a very loyal official. The marriage between two loyal officials is truly a beautiful matter that will be praised for thousands of years. Why are you so angry and out of control? Do you have other thoughts in your heart? No one knew whether or not the emperor had such dark thoughts in his heart. Just as Lin Wan'er had said, the Qing emperor was a valiant ruler. If Fan Xian had asked nicely, perhaps there would have been a chance to turn this matter around. However, Fan Xian's clashing head-on strengthened the emperor's resolve. He would not allow anyone in the world to go against his edict, not even his most trusted and favored Fan Xian. In an instant, the news of the marriage between the Fan Manor and the He Manor spread throughout Jingdo. Although the palace had not issued a clear edict, according to those with inside information, this matter was already set in stone and could not be changed. The civil and military officials thought about it carefully. This marriage was indeed of great benefit to the court. The emperor's heart was indeed distant. However, everyone knew of Fan Xian's attitude toward He Zongwei and knew that he would certainly oppose it. No matter how powerful Fan Xian was, in the end, he was only an official. Could he be more powerful than the emperor? After hearing that scholar who had personally entered the Fan Manor to persuade Fan Xian to agree to this marriage, the news reached its peak. The officials who had been dealt with wretchedly by the Overwatch Council, and the people who were usually intimidated by Fan Xian's power all began to wait for the day the young lady of the Fan family married into the He Manor. They waited to see Sir Fan Jr.'s expression when he swallowed a fly alive. They prepared to see the best joke. Fan Xian's performance since entering the capital had been too perfect. He had put too much pressure on many people. It was a rare opportunity to see Sir Fan Jr. lose his composure, anger, and helplessness. No one wanted to miss it. Thus, countless people secretly cheered for He Zongwei. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian did not do anything. He did not enter the palace again to argue with the emperor. He also did not kick open the imperial censorate's doors and give He Zongwei a beating. Everyone felt it was strange. The story of Fan Xian personally giving He Zongwei a black fist in the manor was a long-circulated gossip in Jingdo. Now, Fan Xian watched as his sister was about to marry Sir He, yet he was still able to appear so calm. Had Sir Fan Jr.'s personality changed? In less than 2 days, everyone knew the reason for Fan Xian's calmness. He had no intention of putting on a show for the court. Instead, he sat calmly to the side, waiting to see others make a joke of themselves. To see the emperor make a joke of himself. King Jing, who had not entered the palace for 2 years and only knew how to uproot weeds for fun, entered the palace late one night and had a big argument with the emperor. According to the eunuchs in the palace, the argument was unusually intense. In the end, King Jing even broke a blue and white porcelain brushwasher in the royal study. In the end, King Jing left angrily. When he was young, he had not beaten his brother in a fight. It looked like he had not won an argument now either. Immediately after, the next day, King Jing went to the imperial censorate. Without any consideration for his dignity, he pointed at He Zongwei and gave him a torrent of abuse. It made He Zongwei's expression change dramatically, but he could only repeatedly nod his head. King Jing's status was too noble. Neither Taichung Temple nor the internal court dared to control him, much less the Jingdo government, city gate guards, and other yamens that maintained public order. Only now did everyone remember that 3 years ago, there seemed to be a vague edict in the palace that the young lady of the Fan family was prepared to marry King Jing's heir, Li Hongqing. Thus, the people watching the show all shut their mouths, terrified that one day King Jing would come knocking on their door. This was King Jing creating havoc in the imperial censorate, and the little duke's miraculous hands had reversed the situation. In the words of Fan Xian, who sat peacefully in his manor drinking tea and listening to the show, when King Jing went out, he was worth two. If the emperor wanted to randomly marry, he could find someone who was not afraid of anything to come out and deal with him. As for this matter, the emperor knew that Fan Xian had done it in secret. However, he didn't have any good methods to deal with his brother. He only had the internal court go to the manor to announce the edict and give King Jing a good scolding. He couldn't bring out any practical methods to stop the manor from loosening the soil and digging the walls. In King Jing's view, his son Li Hongqing had waited bitterly in Dingzhou for Fan Ruoruo for 3 years. For the emperor to suddenly have the young lady of the Fan family marry He Zongwei, this was truly shameless digging. Fan Xian calmly watched the development of this drama in his manor. As long as the palace's decree to appoint a marriage did not enter the manor, he had time to watch. Although King Jing had not asked about matters for a long time, with his identity and status, the emperor had to be wary of his brother's emotions. After some time, the situation in Jingdou calmly became much calmer. The palace, Fan Manor, and King Jing's manor were still in a tug-of-war. He Zongwei himself did not express any attitude. The first news Fan Xian received from the palace was that the emperor had already raised this marriage to him. So he was not surprised by the favor or humiliation. He only calmly thanked the emperor and expressed his willingness. Although the marriage of the young lady of the Fan family had a great impact, it could not affect the operation of the court. The problem was behind this marriage. The emperor's intentions and the harmonious development of the Qing court in the future were the most important. More perceptive people noticed that the struggle between the emperor and Fan Xian was not as simple as a matter of face. It was a suppression and counter-suppression between ruler and official. In this world, if the east wind did not suppress the west wind, then the west wind would suppress the east wind. The emperor was currently testing the east wind. Unexpectedly, he had mistakenly struck King Jing's old battle drum. It was already winter. The cold air seemed to be about to freeze. However, it was loosened slightly by the heat of the furnaces in the private residences. Amidst the mingling of the icy west wind and the warmth of the tens of thousands of furnaces, 13th Wang and Yilinger, who had stayed in Qingzhou to recover, finally returned to Jingdou. Because of the second prince's suicide by poison, Yilinger was still unable to completely let go of her father. Thus, she only sent a letter back to the Yi Manor before moving into the Fan Manor to keep Lin Wan or company. Fan Xian could only personally go to the Bureau of Military Affairs to inform Yi Zhong. After hearing the news, the foremost person in the Qing military sighed sadly and patted Fan Xian's shoulder. He didn't say anything else. Yi Zhong knew that his daughter was living in the Fan Manor, so there was no problem. Thinking of Fan Ruoruo's recent marriage, he couldn't resist asking Fan Xian about it. As the head of the Bureau of Military Affairs, he also didn't understand why the emperor had to make Fan Xian lose face. He also didn't understand why Fan Xian continued to resist. In his opinion, Sir, he had already entered the Hall of Governmental Affairs and was a good match for Fan Ruoruo. As long as Fan Xian nodded, King Jing's side would not be able to find any more reason to make trouble. Everything would become smooth. It seemed that everyone knew of the emperor's stubbornness but had overlooked Fan Xian's. No one could force Fan Xian to do anything he didn't want to do, not even the emperor. Fan Xian didn't explain to Yi Zhong. He only laughed and left the Bureau of Military Affairs. He didn't return to the manor. Instead, he sat in the carriage and headed in the direction of the Imperial College. His wife and Yi Ling were gossiping in the manor, but he was going to see the gossip. Yi Ling and 13th Wang had already returned to the capital. Hongqing had also returned. King Jing's old battle drum was about to be broken by the emperor. He had to personally go out and light this fire. The carriage came to a stop at the intersection of Dongchuan Street. Fan Xian went into a restaurant not far from the bookstore and ordered a few side dishes. As he slowly ate, he looked in the direction of the bookstore. Across from Donbo Bookstore was a medical shop. Fan Xian had personally chosen the name. The words had been written by Xu Wu. The medical shop managed by the young lady of the Fan family had received great praise throughout Jingdou in a short amount of time. Her medical skills were exquisite, and her fees were low. She didn't care about the status of the patients. She only had to wait in line for consultation and medicine. Before long, she had won the praise of the common people of Jingdou. It was almost dusk, but there was still a long line in front of the medical shop in the cold wind. The capable servants Lin Wan had sent from the Fan Manor were maintaining order outside the shop and handing out hot soup. All of the details were taken care of. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked in that direction. Indeed, he saw the slightly black-faced official. Who else could it be but He Zongwei? Due to the pressure from the palace, he couldn't hit He Zongwei every time he saw him. Furthermore, he found that He Zongwei was indeed clever. He knew that everyone's words were fake. Only the young lady of the Fan family's nod was real. Recently, after He Zongwei left court, he would come to the medical shop to greet Fan Ruoruo before returning home. The guard between men and women in the Qing kingdom was not as strict as in northern Qi. Additionally, Fan Ruoruo practiced medicine on the streets, so she didn't have to worry so much. Thus, no one could stop He Zongwei from greeting her politely. Now, this had become news that everyone in Jingdo knew. It had already become a much-told tale. Fan Xian's eyesight was very good. He saw clearly that his sister would occasionally say a few words to He Zongwei as she consulted. He was not surprised by this. As early as 5 years ago in Yisher Tavern, he knew that his sister and He Zongwei knew each other. They had probably met at the poetry conference in King Jing's manor. At that time, the young lady of the Fan family was a talented girl in Jingdo, and He Zongwei was a scholar in Jingdo. Naturally, the two of them knew each other. He sighed in his heart. Thinking of how everyone in Jingdo had changed these years, he couldn't help but feel a little strange. Back then, He Zongwei's arrogance had yet to be shed. His face was as black as charcoal. Even if he wanted to flatter him, it would appear unnatural. Thus, he was not in Fan Xian's eyes at all. Who would have thought that after a few years, this person would actually become so calm and steady? Perhaps there was still a bit of arrogance in his bones, but when he did things, there was not a trace of arrogance. The speed at which he matured was truly astounding. No wonder this person still received the support of most of the officials in court, and the favor of the person in the palace despite Fan Xian's purposeful slander. Fan Xian sat in the restaurant and watched with cold eyes. He wanted to see whether or not He Zongwei had the ability to suddenly launch a surprise attack and resolve this stalemate while he and the emperor were wrestling. At this moment, a rider galloped over from the other end of the street. Fan Xian put down his wine cup and smiled with narrowed eyes. He thought to himself that his surprise attack had finally arrived. King Jing's heir, Li Hongqing, had returned to the capital to debrief. He had just come out of the palace and did not return to the manor. He did not remove his armor or even bring a personal guard. Instead, he asked for the location of the medical shop and came alone to it. Fan Xian watched from a distance in the restaurant. He saw Li Hongqing dismount from his horse and calmly greet He Zongwei. He then said a few words to Ruoruo. He was too far away, so he didn't know the contents of their conversation. However, he could see that his sister's expression was one of joy at seeing an old friend. Immediately after, Li Hongqing said something and began to argue with Fan Ruoruo. Fan Xian's heart tightened. He stuck out half his head. He understood his sister's icy nature very well. He wondered if Li Hongqing had said something inappropriate and offended his sister. At this moment, He Zongwei seemed to have come forward to explain a bit, but Li Hongqing did not even look at him. He ordered the servants of Fan Manor to close the door of the medical shop. Then, under Fan Ruoruo's slightly angry gaze, he unreasonably grabbed her and put her on a horse. Amidst the clip-clop of the horse's hooves, the heir of King Jing, who had just returned to the capital, grabbed the young lady of the Fan family and mounted his horse. He then rode in the direction of the Fan Manor. It left behind a street of missing jaws. At that time, there were no spectacles. Seeing this scene, Fan Xian couldn't help but be dumbfounded. His expression was very ugly. He thought to himself that Hongqing was quite something. A few years ago, he only knew how to read poetry and pretend to be cultured. Now, after fighting in Dingzhou for 3 years, he knew how to play the tyrant. The servants of the Fan Manor and the servants of the medical shop, as well as the patients waiting to be seen, were also dumbfounded. However, these Fan Manor servants knew what had happened recently and what trouble King Jing's manor had been making. The Fan Manor and King Jing's manor had a good relationship, so these people pretended not to see this scene. The most dumbfounded person was, of course, Sir He Zongwei, who had maintained his elegance and bearing. The medical shop closed its doors. The people gradually dispersed. Sir He stood alone in the doorway of the medical shop and looked at the street in a daze. He did not dare go to the Fan Manor because he was afraid Fan Xian would actually beat him. Thus, he could only watch helplessly. This scene looked extremely wretched. Fan Xian slowly came to his senses and recovered his calm. He knew that Li Hongqing would not do anything rash. He had probably exploded in anger after hearing the news on the road, which was why he was acting so forcefully. If Fan Xian had to choose his brother-in-law, Li Hongqing, who had broken off his relationships with women and turned over a new leaf, was much better than Xueqi. Thinking of this, a smile rose to his face. Invite Xueqi up here to sit. He slowly placed the wine cup on the table and ordered Mu Feng'er behind him. In a moment, Xueqi entered the restaurant with his brows furrowed and sat across from Fan Xian. This was the first time in many years that the two of them had met in private. Fan Xian gently used his finger to spin the small wine cup. He knew that there were spies from the palace downstairs. They should be the attendants the emperor had bestowed to Xueqi, but he did not care much. Eat. Fan Xian raised his chopsticks. Although Xueqi didn't know why Sir Fan Jr. had summoned him, he was not afraid. Very shamelessly, he began to eat. Looking at his posture, if Fan Xian did not shout for him to stop, he would not put down his chopsticks. Looking at this scene, Fan Xian felt a bit of admiration for this person. There were not many people in the world who could be so natural under his gaze. Furthermore, this person knew very well that Fan Xian greatly disliked him. After the food and wine, Fan Xian calmly said, Sir He, you have come to the medical shop to look after us these days. As your brother, I must thank you. You are too polite, Xueqi replied with a slightly astringent smile. Fan Xian raised his brows and said, You saw the scene earlier. You should know what King Jing's attitude is. Xueqi was slightly absent-minded. After a moment he slowly said, You have good methods. This has nothing to do with methods. Fan Xian looked at him and said straightforwardly, I've never had a chance to sit and talk with you. Today is a rare opportunity, so I'll tell you directly. This matter is impossible, so you should give up on it. Xueqi's slightly dark face froze. A moment later he said sincerely, Sir, I know. Fan Xian tilted his head and listened to the other person's words. It went in one ear and came out the other. Xueqi sincerely spoke of his admiration for Fan Ruoruo and explained everything he had done these years. He humbly hoped that Fan Xian would give him a chance. I don't have any objections, Fan Xian said. Right now, it is King Jing's manor that has objections to this matter. Last time, when the palace appointed the heir to King Jing's marriage, it was blocked by you. Xueqi was not flustered at all. His eyelids were slightly lowered as a stubborn light flashed through them. When water comes, we drown it with earth. When the edict comes, we burn it with fire. If I can block it once, I can block it a second time. These words were treasonous, but Fan Xian said it in front of Xueqi. He was bullying him for not daring to use these words to enter the palace and report him to the emperor. Don't think that just because the emperor has said something to you, you can have wishful thinking. Or, does Sir He think that by currying favor with Ruoruo, you can let me go? You also know that I dislike you, so you don't mind offending me one more time. However, I must remind you that there are degrees to offending me. If you offend me too much, I will actually go to your manor with a kitchen knife to find you. Fan Xian reminded him seriously. Chapter 623. For something like killing, you use your mouth to do it, but I use my hands to do it. Fan Xian stood and glanced at him. Think carefully. If I kill you, will the emperor have me pay with my life for yours? After these words were said, Xueqi fell silent. A moment later, he took a deep breath. A flush of embarrassment and anger gradually appeared on his slightly dark face. Ever since he had entered the court, his journey had been smooth. He had obtained the emperor's trust and favor, and he was highly regarded and respected by his subordinates and colleagues. However, when faced with the duke in front of him, he was ridiculed and found it difficult to hide. He was now an official of the Hall of Governmental Affairs. Other than Fan Xian, who else in court dared to speak to him in such a tone and use life and death to threaten him? However, Xueqi also knew that when faced with Fan Xian, there was nothing he could do. Putting aside nonsense like being favored by the emperor, just his blood relationship with the emperor was something that he, as an official, could never hope to achieve. He Zhongwei did not understand why Sir Fan Jr. had such strong enmity toward him. All the civil and military officials in court did not understand. If it was the matter of Prime Minister Lin's fall, it was single-handedly controlled by the eldest princess. At that time, He Zhongwei was only a small chess piece and had not yet entered the court. Furthermore, after the matter, it was clear that these were the emperor's edicts. How could he be blamed? He couldn't help but feel confused. How did Sir Fan Jr.'s enmity toward him come about? Sometimes, when He Zhongwei woke up in the middle of the night, he would feel cold and damp. He was doing very well in court, but he knew that Fan Xian was always watching him coldly from behind. It was not a good feeling to be watched by such a cold and sinister official. Logically speaking, He Zhongwei knew that Fan Xian disliked him, so he should not have any thoughts about the young lady of the Fan family. However, he always thought that the emperor's edict trumped everything. He also wanted to use this marriage to express his feelings to Fan Xian. At the same time, he could ease the relationship between them. If he truly became Sir Fan Jr.'s brother-in-law, then he shouldn't have to constantly worry about the cold gaze behind his back, right? But the most important reason why He Zhongwei had the courage to pursue this marriage was because he had always longed for Fan Ruoruo. This desire had started 5 or 6 years ago, and it had continued to this day, never weakening. That was why he had been single all these years, just like Crown Prince Hongqing. In fact, the two men had the same reason for not marrying. In the end, he did not understand Fan Xian. He did not know that the reason Fan Xian disliked him was because he had seen his fanatical gaze toward Ruoruo in Yishir Tavern. It was truly a crime for no reason. How pitiful! The bit of desire in the depths of his heart had finally been shattered by Fan Xian's straightforward words into a heart of glass. Fan Xian said, "Don't come to the medical shop again." He Zhongwei's heart began to race. It would be very difficult for him to give up on Miss Fan. Although this person's character was average, when it came to love, he was deeply rooted and somewhat infatuated. "I understand what you mean." He Zhongwei stood and forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart. Doing his best to remain calm, he said, "Tomorrow, I will enter the palace and report to the emperor to reject this marriage." Fan Xian looked at him and shook his head. "The palace's decree to appoint a marriage has not come out. What need is there for you to reject it? Don't try to hide your little thoughts from me. Go cry and complain in front of the emperor, and aggrievely say that you are not worthy of the young lady of the Fan family. You won't say a single bad word about me. But when the emperor sees you like this, he will know that I have bullied you again. Whoever I bully, that person will be red. This is the current situation." He looked at He Zhongwei and smiled self-mockingly. "Do you want to use this matter to make the emperor pity your loyalty even more?" He Zhongwei finally could not suppress the anger in his heart. He looked coldly at Fan Xian and said, "What exactly do you want me to do? This won't do, and that won't do. Do you have to force an official to death before you are satisfied? That's what you said yourself." Fan Xian looked at him with slight mockery. "The night before last, who the scholar personally came to the manor to speak on your behalf. Last night, the former scholar of the Hall of the Virtuous, Zhang Wenxiang, your former teacher, came with Scholar Panling to speak on your behalf. Sir, he is at the height of his fame. With 3 scholars acting as a matchmaker, how could I, a mere commissioner of the Overwatch Council, force you?" Hearing these plain and harsh words, He Zhongwei found it difficult to suppress the anger in his heart. In a low voice he said, "May I ask, where exactly have I done wrong to offend you?" Fan Xian smiled slightly mockingly and said, "I don't like you. That is your fault. Sir Fan Jr., I am the emperor's official." He Zhongwei smiled in his extreme anger. Coldly, he said, "Even if your power overturns the court, you are still only the emperor's official. Threatening a court official in the street and looking down on the emperor, are you not afraid that the emperor will send down an edict and take away your position of power? You must know that one must be careful and not be arrogant in their actions." Fan Xian did not get angry. He only stood calmly across from him and quietly said, "Everyone understands this principle. 3 years ago, the second prince once said the exact same words as you in the tea shop of Baoyue brothel. Don't forget, he is lying in his grave while I am outside." After saying this, Fan Xian left the restaurant. He had already said what he needed to say to He Zhongwei and expressed his attitude to him. As for whether or not the other party was willing to accept it, that was his problem. Returning to the Fan Manor, he saw Ruoruo surrounded by Wan and Yiling. She was quietly saying something with an unnatural expression. Li Hongqing, who had taken her back to the manor, had left for some reason and was not in the manor. Seeing Fan Xian return, Lin Wan gave him a meaningful glance and shook her head helplessly. It was probably because she felt helpless about her sister-in-law's marriage, which had caused a storm in the city. Yiling only glanced at Fan Xian. She did not, as Fan Xian had expected, charge forward and ask him, as her elder brother, why couldn't he even do such a small thing? It looked like love was indeed gentle. Fan Xian didn't ask where 13th Wang was. He couldn't resist smiling slightly and waving his hand at his sister. The brother and sister entered the second study. Did Hongqing run away first because he was afraid I would beat him? Fan Xian asked quietly as he and his sister sat facing each other. Fan Ruoruo blushed slightly. After all, riding with a young man on the street was indeed a very embarrassing thing. After a moment of silence, she quietly said, "Something happened in the manor, so he left first." Fan Xian nodded quietly in his heart. He had been worried that his sister would be angry at Hongqing's impetuous actions. It looked like it was all right. It seemed that Li Hongqing's ruffian tactics were not necessarily a bad thing. Fan Ruoruo suddenly came to a realization and looked at Fan Xian in a daze. "Brother was there just now?" Fan Xian paused and smiled. This matter spread quickly. Everyone in Jingdo knows that the heir has returned to the capital and is fighting with Sir He for a wife. Of course I know. Hongqing is also messing around. Fan Ruoruo's expression was slightly angry. There are still so many patients waiting to be seen in the medical shop. We'll talk about those things later. It is impossible for the patients in the world to stop. You can't cure them all in one day. Fan Xian gazed at his sister and asked solemnly, "I know that He Zongwei often goes to the medical shop these days. I want to ask you something. What exactly is your attitude toward the emperor's arranged marriage?" Without thinking, Fan Ruoruo calmly said, "I don't want to marry right now." These days, He Zongwei had been going to the medical shop to sit quietly and not as a demonstration. He appeared cultured, elegant, and sincere. Fan Ruoruo was not a woman who lived in a vacuum. She knew that there had been recent gossip about her. She also knew that her brother was troubled by this matter. Naturally, she would make it clear to He Zongwei. However, He Zongwei remained unyielding. He displayed the spirit of a dead pig who was not afraid of being burned. He also wore a mask of sincerity. Fan Ruoruo could not copy Fan Xija and pick up a broom to chase him away. "Fine, if you don't want to marry, then don't marry." The calmness on Fan Xian's face was not faked. "You know that although I appear gentle, I am actually a bit domineering. I don't like He Zongwei. Even if you agree to marry him, I will still break up the affectionate couple." Fan Ruoruo couldn't resist glaring at him and muttered in a low voice. When they were young, he had talked about the freedom of love. Now, he only knew how to be domineering. She had no idea that when the two of them told ghost stories in their childhood, Fan Xian, who was a dozen years older than her, had long naturally felt like bringing up his daughter. His own daughter was going to marry someone. No father would believe in the nonsense of freedom of love. There was no such thing in the Qing kingdom, no such thing in that world, and no such thing in the entire universe. After these words, Fan Ruoruo fell silent. Her two hands gripped the corners of her clothes and rubbed them forcefully. Her nervous and complicated emotions made her no different from any other woman in the world. After a long time, she suddenly sighed. Gazing at Fan Xian, she faintly said, "Brother, am I very willful?" If she had been placed in another noble manor, or anywhere else in the world, Fan Ruoruo's choice of marriage and love would have been particularly different. She had first rejected King Jing's request for a marriage alliance, fled Jingdo, and studied under Ku He for many years. Now, she had rejected the emperor's second arranged marriage. Disobeying an edict and refusing to marry, in a feudal and imperial society, would bring a great deal of danger and inconvenience to one's family. For the sake of one's own life, to sink one's family into instability, everyone would probably think such an action was a willful and irresponsible one. But Fan Xian was everyone in this world. He was the only person in this world, the only Fubawa, a man who had seen sexual politics. Thus, he never thought there was anything to criticize about his sister's decision. Perhaps that Yi woman had also seen it many years ago. After all, she had already left. Now, there was only Fan Xian standing unyieldingly in this world. In his way of supporting his sister's willfulness, he thought back to that beautiful world where marriage did not require elders to name names. That beautiful world, at least in some areas, was more equal. Are you stupid? Fan Xian's expression became cold. Ever since you were young, I taught you that your own happiness is more important than the heavens. Other than something you truly want to do, nothing is worth making any sacrifices or concessions. Loyalty and filial piety must be spoken of, but in front of your and my own happiness, it is not worth mentioning. But, isn't this a very selfish action? Fan Ruoruo was not frightened by her brother's icy expression. She raised her face and said seriously, "Because of my matter, the manor is not at peace. The entire Jingdo is in an uproar." Before she had finished speaking, Fan Xian had already waved his hand to stop her. Furrowing his brows, he said, "You are a girl I raised single-handedly. Although you haven't been by my side as long as Cece and the other girls, you know I have high hopes for you. But you know that I have high hopes for you. I hope that you can become someone different from the other women in this world." What is willfulness? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. Father and grandmother are both in Danzhou. In the capital, only I make decisions for you. What is there to be afraid of being willful? As for being selfish, I have always been an extremely selfish person, particularly when it comes to family. You should know this very well. Fan Ruoruo lowered her head and was speechless. Her eyes gradually became wet. Only she, who was involved, knew how much her brother had worried about her marriage after he entered the capital. Back then, in order to reject King Jing's marriage proposal, he had even made an agreement with the northern Qi people to exchange her for Ku He's tutelage. It seemed simple, but in reality, Fan Xian had paid a great price for it. Every time she thought of it, Fan Ruoruo always felt that her willfulness had caused her brother to worry too much. The heavier the guilt in her heart, the more she could feel her brother's affection for her. All kinds of feelings mingled in her heart. It was not something that could be expressed clearly with words. In the next few days, Fan Xian seemed to have forgotten about the arranged marriage in the palace. He only sank into the Overwatch Council and Yan Bingyun arranging matters regarding Dongyi. The Xi Lake matter had already laid a good foundation. No matter how capable Chief Su Bida and Haitang Duoduo, who had changed her name to Songji Xianling, were, the spies in Dingzhou and Qingzhou had been completely wiped out by the Overwatch Council. Additionally, the grasslands had once again sunk into an unstable state because of the left virtuous prince's sudden death. The western border of the Qing kingdom could finally breathe a sigh of relief. All of the affairs of the Overwatch Council were actually handled by Yan Bingyun. Every time he thought of this matter, Fan Xian couldn't help but feel lucky for his decision to enter deep into Shangjing to save Sir Yan Jr. His abilities lay in sudden attacks, decisive attacks, and judgment of the general situation. Yan Bingyun was the best person to plan and execute the specific plans. Without Yan Bingyun's help, Fan Xian would not have been able to control such an enormous Overwatch Council system. Events had long proven this point. After Fan Xian entered the capital, the Overwatch Council's major operations were all carried out by this fluttering white-clothed Sir Yan Jr., who was clearly separated from the Overwatch Council's black official robes. The only time Fan Xian had decided on his own was the matter of the Jiaozhou Navy clearing the army. After this operation, it had been thoroughly criticized by Chen Pingping. After Fan Xian told Yan Bingyun of his and the emperor's intentions, he stopped worrying about the Dongyi matter. He only took 13th Wang and quietly entered the palace. Although Fan Xian and the emperor were still in a cold war because of Ruoruo's marriage, this was a major matter concerning court politics. Neither father nor son would choose to be angry. Since the emperor already secretly knew of 13th Wang's existence, Fan Xian would not make a big mistake on such a small matter. As for the marriage appointment, although the task of challenging the emperor had already been handed to King Jing's manor, Fan Xian still watched with concern from the side. Fan Ruoruo continued to go to the medical shop every day to take care of the patients. Crown Prince Hongqing stood outside the medical shop with a cold expression. Perhaps the Crown Prince felt great anger at the news of the marriage appointment in the palace. His face was extremely dark. The patients who came to and from the medical shop couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts as they felt the coldness from this noble's body. Li Hongqing was now the #1 figure in the Dingzhou military. It was rare for him to return to the capital to debrief once in 3 years. Yet, he was willing to stand outside a medical shop as a bodyguard. For a proper general to be a door god, everyone in Jingdo felt a glimmer of coldness. Even Hu the scholar did not waste any more words with Fan Xian. He Zhongwei did not give up the idea in his heart because of Fan Xian's threats. He went to the medical shop a few times and was coldly chased out by Li Hongqing. The small medical shop had become a wrestling ground between an official and a general. However, He Zhongwei was, after all, a civil official. How could he defeat Hongqing, who pretended to be a martial artist? A medical shop had already become a sight in Jingdo. Hearing of this, Fan Xian couldn't help but sigh. He thought to himself that old Master Lu was right. Words were never as powerful as fists. He smiled slightly and felt sad for He Zhongwei. He was a proper official of the Hall of Governmental Affairs, yet he had run into two unreasonable but indescribably noble descendants of the royal family like himself and Hongqing. In the end, he could only suffer. During these few days, He Zhongwei had entered the palace once and probably expressed his intention to tactfully decline the marriage appointment. This was not outside of Fan Xian's expectations. Given He Zhongwei's harsh thoughts, he would not pass up such an opportunity to strike at Fan Xian. Even though Fan Xian had warned him, he still did not give up. As expected, when the emperor saw He Zhongwei's dim appearance, he guessed that Fan Xian had secretly and inhumanely threatened his trusted official. He flew into a rage and urgently summoned Fan Xian into the palace to give him a good scolding in the royal study. Fan Xian only listened expressionlessly and, as always, used silence to resist. Appointing a marriage was a small matter. The emperor intended to use this matter to completely break down his defenses and have him become a timid and blindly loyal official. This was an arrangement he could not accept. He was not afraid of the emperor's displeasure. The present was different from the past. The Overwatch Council and Palace Treasury in Fan Xian's hands provided the most important order and financial support for the healthy development and maintenance of the Qing court. Even the emperor knew this. He knew that he was becoming more and more inseparable from this proud illegitimate child. For the Qing emperor, the more he admired Fan Xian, the more he hoped that Fan Xian would reveal all of his thoughts to him and listen to all of his arrangements. He always felt that Ji, this child, was sometimes too stubborn. His personality was a bit too distant. He even faintly felt that he wanted to jump out of his control. For a powerful ruler, this kind of feeling was not very comfortable. Thus, he wanted Fan Xian to back down. Entering the winter months, Fan Xian still did not back down. He continued to carry King Jing's manor to fight with the palace. After the matter of the marriage between the He and Fan families caused a ruckus, it gradually calmed down. There was no follow-up edict from the palace. The Crown Prince's door god continued to coldly watch all of the doctors and patients who came in from the medical shop. If any of those poor patients had the surname He, they would all take a fake name and go see the doctor again. The only person in the world who was not afraid of the emperor was probably King Jing. After all, he had fought with his brother many times when he was young. Even though he hadn't won many of them, his fists had at least tasted dragon meat. Once they were close, there was less respect and fear in his heart. Furthermore, one could be strong without desires. King Jing's life was filled with flowers, grass, and soil. He never interfered with court politics. The emperor probably always felt some guilt toward his only brother. Other than furrowing his brows, he could not come up with any more methods of punishment. Li Hongqing had led the army in Dingzhou for 3 years. He had taken the lead and bathed in blood as he killed the enemy. Even if he had not performed meritorious deeds, he had worked hard. He was clearly going to steal He Zhongwei's wife. What could the emperor do? It was only because of the emperor's words that he could not go back on. Additionally, he could not save face. That was why he stubbornly insisted on his own opinion. The first snow fell in Jingdo. Fan Xian blew out a mouthful of white mist. Standing by the carriage, he said to 13th Wang beside him, "Everything that needs to be said has been said. The Qing kingdom can put some pressure on the manner of the master of the city, but I can't do anything about the differences within the sword hut. Presumably, you also don't want me to interfere." 13th Wang was going to leave the Qing kingdom and return to Dongyi's sword hut to accompany his teacher on the last leg of his journey. Fan Xian had specially taken the time to send him off. The two of them stood alone in the snow and chatted here and there. Most of the words were said by Fan Xian. "I'll wait for you at the sword hut." 13th Wang put his bag on his back and held the green banner tightly in his hand. Looking at Fan Xian with a warm smile, he said, "Come early." Fan Xian also smiled. After 13th Wang entered the palace, the emperor finally nodded and gave him full authority over the Dongyi matter. The initiative was finally in his hands. He was in a good mood. "Thank you." Fan Xian paused slightly and then continued. "I hope I won't have to thank you in the future." 13th Wang started. Only then did he understand what his thanks were directed at. Shaking his head, he walked into the wind and snow. Chapter 624. The mink coat was very warm. Looking at the figure gradually disappearing into the wind and snow, Fan Xian's heart was also very warm. His life was truly frightening and full of scheming and scheming. Although it was fulfilling, it also made his heart tired. It was a rare enjoyment to be able to associate with a simple and pure person. Pulling back his gaze from the snowflakes in the distance, Fan Xian's heart suddenly jumped. He had a strange feeling. It was as if next spring, when the sword hut opened for the last time, he might have some experiences he had never had before. He walked to the side of the black carriage and raised his right knee. Lowering his head, he carefully scraped at the snow and mud on the bottom of his boots on the steps of the carriage. As he scraped at the snow, he thought silently. After a long time, he lifted the thick cotton curtain of the carriage and lowered his head to crawl in. A gust of hot wind hit him in the face. Inside the spacious Overwatch Council carriage, a specially made little heater was releasing a spring-like aura. Compared to the freezing weather outside, it was a completely different world. Fan Xian accepted the towel and brushed away the snow on his collar. "He's already gone far away. Can we go back now?" Yi Ling accepted the towel from his hand and lowered her head. Her long eyelashes decorated her bright eyes, as well as the complicated emotions in them. Quietly she said, "I'm not here to send him off." "If you're not here to send 13th brother off, are you here to admire the snow with me?" Fan Xian asked without good humor. "I really don't understand what you're thinking. It's already been over a month, yet it's still like when we first met in Qingzhou." "Teacher, I'm not thinking anything," Yi Ling said seriously as she raised her head. "Next year, Sigu Jian is going to die. Dongyi is split into two factions of opinion and is arguing endlessly. 13th Wang's return to Dongyi this time will probably be troublesome. Although he is Sigu Jian's most beloved last disciple, he doesn't have many connections." Fan Xian thought for a bit and then slowly said, "I'm afraid there will still be a fight in the end." "Can't you help him? He has done so much for the Overwatch Council," Yi Ling asked anxiously. "You don't need to say that. He is someone who works for me. Of course, I have to repay him," Fan Xian said. Fan Xian said, "Sigu Jian's attitude toward me is sufficiently sincere. Although this strange old creature certainly doesn't want to make any deals with the emperor, it shouldn't be a problem to discuss a deal with me." He suddenly looked at Yi Ling and said quietly, "The problem is that after he returns to Dongyi, he will probably stay there for a long time. Have you thought about this problem?" "Why am I thinking about this?" After the second prince's death, Yi Ling was no longer as free and easy as before. She had become much more silent and mature. Although she still talked and laughed freely in front of Fan Xian and these familiar people, regardless of whether it was Fan Xian or Lin Wan'er, they could all see the shadow in the depths of her heart. It was not until she met 13th Wang in Qingzhou and saw each other's scenery that Yi Ling's emotions seemed to shake off the military on the border. Fan Xian was very happy to see this kind of change. He also knew that given 13th Wang's identity, the matter between the two of them was indeed very difficult. He shook his head and did not elaborate on the issue. It was Yi Ling who, because of her own thoughts, thought of the matter that had been troubling these young people recently. Looking at Fan Xian, she asked carefully, "Ruoro, are we just going to drag this matter out like this?" At the mention of this matter, Fan Xian's head was full of questions. Originally, he had thought that with King Jing and his son acting as the bad guys, the emperor would go with the flow and take back this muddled arranged marriage. He had not expected the emperor to be so stubborn. He used the excuse that the Fan family had already rejected King Jing's marriage request and completely ignored these movements. "Let's drag it out for now. With so many of our faces added together, there will at least be some weight. It won't be good for the emperor to forcefully push through." Fan Xian pressed his lips together. He thought that if his sister was willing to marry Hongqing, then this matter would be much easier to handle. At least in front of the emperor, it would be more reasonable to argue. I don't know He Zhongwei, but I hear he has a good reputation. I don't know where you get such anger from, Yilinger said casually. Anger? Fan Xian smiled and didn't say it clearly. Vaguely he said, if the He and Fan families join in marriage, wouldn't that be like a lunchbox? What kind of lunchbox? 8 treasures rice. That's right, the governor is holding a banquet at Yisher Tavern. Wan-er wants me to remind you not to be late, Yilinger said seriously. Fan Xian's heart tightened. Only now did he remember this interesting matter. For the sake of the great prince taking a secondary fei, Fan Xian had bravely taken on the heavy responsibility of disciplining the young lady of the Wang family. Immediately after, the arranged marriage appeared in the palace. In his anger, Fan Xian did not leave any leeway in his lecture. It made Wang Tong so angry that she howled out of the manor and offended the commander of the Jingdo garrison, Xueqi. He had thought that after this lesson, Wang Tong would certainly be angry and never come back to the manor again. Unexpectedly, after a few days, Wang Tong begged Xueqi to bring her back to the Fan manor. She begged Sir Fan Jr. to take her as a disciple. Furthermore, her words were sincere. She said that she had changed a lot and would never act as recklessly as before. The young lady of the Wang family had suddenly become so sensible. It gave Fan Xian a fright. He thought that this unruly young lady truly loved the great prince. Otherwise, she would not have wronged herself like this. It was the second day that Yanjing Governor Wang Zhikuan had returned to the capital to debrief. The governor had personally invited Fan Xian to a banquet to thank him for helping him discipline his daughter. Wang Tong is your fan. Fan Xian furrowed his brows. Have you seen her before? Yiling could guess what a fan meant. She smiled helplessly and said, I saw her many years ago. At that time, she was just a little girl of 7 or 8. Who would have thought that her temper would change so much when she grew up? She's much better now, Fan Xian said with his eyes closed. Looks like the young ladies are all the same. They're all masochists. If I don't give them a good beating, they won't listen to reason. Yiling expression became awkward. Thinking of the old matter in Jingdo, she glared fiercely at Fan Xian and said, Are you talking about me? Fan Xian's eyes remained closed, but a faint smile rose to the corners of his lips. Back then, you were going to confess after being beaten. Now, you're confessing without being beaten. As the two of them spoke, the carriage slowly turned back toward Jingdo. Crushing the ice and snow on the road, it moved forward along the deep tracks. Fan Xian felt that the carriage was a bit too hot. He lifted a corner of the window, hoping to let in some cool winter wind. His gaze moved along the window and caught a glimpse of silver branches and snow trees. It was a beautiful scenery. He looked at this scene in a daze and couldn't help but think of himself. He Zhongwei couldn't be too forceful, but he wasn't too worried. After he resolved the Dongyi matter next year and performed a great service for the Qing kingdom, no matter how harsh and merciless the emperor was, he would probably not be able to bear to force him again. However, the wind and snow made it difficult for the horse to move forward. Fan Xian suddenly felt that he was like a horse in the emperor's harness, forced to do his best to break through the wind and snow and drag a massive carriage forward into the distance. That distance might not be where the horse wanted to go. He took a deep breath and allowed the cold wind to cool his chest and the heart hidden there. Putting down the curtain, he closed his eyes and thought calmly. Regardless of whether it was Shiliang or Dongyi, he was fighting so hard to be a pawn for the emperor. He didn't want to change any of this. In the entire world, the only person he didn't have the courage to challenge was this unfathomable emperor. If Uncle Wu Zhu and the chest were still by his side, the situation would certainly change greatly. However, that change would not be good. Fan Xian shook his head and tossed aside this annoying possibility. Although Uncle Wu Zhu was his servant in name, in reality, he was his closest family. Everyone needed to find the most important thing in their lives. Fortunately, the emperor had changed a lot. Although his recent spats with Fan Xian and King Jing were very excessive, at least he showed some humanity, or perhaps it was the humanity of an old man. Regardless of which scent it was, it at least confirmed that the emperor was beginning to walk out of his altar, and was no longer an illusory figure high above. Winter passed and spring came. It was nonsense again. In short, on a bright and beautiful day in spring, the Qing kingdom had long sent away the countless random snowfalls that had fallen and welcomed the warmer weather. Newly sprouted green buds and rustling emerald flowers were growing. In the most important county in the northeast of the Qing kingdom, Yanjing, a group of particularly important people welcomed them. It was already March. The green trees on both sides of the road swayed in the spring wind like children holding bouquets of flowers and shouting welcome. It looked like even these plants knew the importance of this group. Yanjing was slightly to the north. From Jingdo, they went straight to Shao Mountain, turned north, and passed through a flat road leading to Cangzhou. Stretching northeast, they arrived at this large city. Decades ago, this place had been a city of the Wei Kingdom. History called it Nanjing. However, it had been forcefully taken down by the Qing kingdom's great emperor and renamed Yanjing, taking the meaning of a swallow returning with mud in its mouth. As for whether or not the old Yanjing had been the land of the Qing kingdom's ancestors 1,000 years ago, no one knew. However, the name Yanjing at least gave the Qing kingdom a righteous name. Additionally, the people here were docile and lived mostly between changes of rulers, so they did not have strong national feelings. Thus, the Qing kingdom had only ruled for 30 years, but it had become a familiar place. Just like that, it became the capital of the Qing kingdom. Yanjing was very large and prosperous. It bordered a dozen small vassal states controlled by Dongyi. It was particularly close to the Song kingdom. If the Qing kingdom wanted to conquer Dongyi, their army would have to come from Yanjing. Thus, during these 20 years, the soldiers on the border of Yanjing were the elite of the Qing military. They were on par with the Dingzhou army in Xiliang and the northern camp near Cangzhou in the north. Yanjing was the largest city the Qing kingdom had ever conquered. It was the best proof of the Qing emperor's martial prowess. Thus, the court had always been very attentive to this place. Not only had they invested large amounts of manpower, resources, and money into the military, they had also given it special treatment in government affairs. The civil officials serving in Yanjing had all been raised half a rank. Even the 6 yamens had special offices in Yanjing. Everyone knew the reason for such generous treatment. To the east of this place was Dongyi, and to the north, past Cangzhou, was northern Qi. The Qing kingdom wanted to unify the world, so Yanjing would certainly be the starting point of the army's attack and the front-line headquarters. The Qing emperor had prepared for this for 30 years. He had managed Yanjing like an iron bucket. No one knew just how much grain and weapons were stored in the city. Presently, the head of the Yanjing military was Governor Wang Zhikuan. He had always been deeply trusted by the Qing emperor. In the 7th year of the Qing calendar, the Yanjing camp had played an important role in stabilizing the country. It was because of the Yanjing camp's great power that the Cangzhou northern camp, which had lost Yan Xueqi, was so smoothly taken over by Xueqi. The officials of Dongshan Road had no power to retaliate at all. The head of the civil officials in Yanjing was also an important figure. His name was Mei Zhili. He was once a student of Duke Lu. 6 or 7 years ago, he had already taken up the position of Jingdo magistrate. Later, he rose through the ranks and came to Yanjing. He had long become a second-level local official, only half a rank lower than a governor. These 2 important figures were waiting outside Yanjing with a smile. The officials and subordinates at their sides did not show any surprise. These officials and generals knew that although this group was not the emperor's royal entourage, it was about the same rank as the royal entourage. Furthermore, Governor Wang's daughter was also in the group. Amidst the music, countless signboards passed by. Eunuchs with swords walked by. The group of carriages stopped in front of the welcoming officials. A young official wearing black official robes with a light yellow ribbon around his waist lifted the curtain and came in front of the group. The person who had come was Fan Xian. He had come with the identity of an imperial envoy, so he was not surprised to see the array of people in front of him. He only laughed bitterly and accompanied Governor Wang and Sir Mei to go through all the procedures. Only then did he let out a long breath. He invited the 2 of them to rise so he could greet them. Wang Zhikuan and Mei Zhili repeatedly said that they did not dare. Although the 2 of them were powerful officials, when they met this young master, they knew it was better to be respectful. Otherwise, no one knew what kind of wretched ending they would have in the future. They had heard that the days of the currently popular Sir He in court had not been very good. Wang Zhikuan had only returned to Jingdo to report on his duties in the winter. He had met Fan Xian twice, so he was not a stranger, particularly since Fan Xian had brought Wang Tong back along the way. He also had the identity of Wang Tong-er's private teacher. Thus, Wang Zhikuan was particularly warm to him. Other than being polite, he purposely added a sense of ease. Fan Xian smiled merrily as he watched this scene. He guessed that this military elder had purposely let Sir Mei see this. Regardless of whether it was in Dingzhou or Yanjing, there would always be friction. Governor Wang probably thought that with his help in court, Mei Zhili and the other civil officials would be more cautious. Mei Zhili laughed at the side and then walked forward. He said to Fan Xian, "How is the old man?" Fan Xian said seriously, "Father is living comfortably in Danzhou. The Duke's health is also good." The Duke he was talking about was Lady Lu's father and Mei Zhili's teacher. Wang Zhikuan watched this scene from the side and began to mutter in his heart. Only now did he understand that old Mei and Sir Fan Jr. had long known each other. Fan Xian and Mei Zhili were indeed old acquaintances. The first sensational thing that had happened when Fan Xian entered the capital had happened right under Mei Zhili's eyes. Mei Zhili had helped the Fan Manor greatly in the matter of punching Guobaokuan in the street. "Why are you not staying in court and instead running to Yanjing?" Fan Xian asked with a smile. Mei Zhili lowered his voice and smiled. "How can a person be a Jingdou magistrate? It's best to run far away." The old man and the young man laughed loudly. Mei Zhili glanced at Wang Zhikuan with an unspeakable pride. He thought, "You're walking the path of the Duke of Danbua because you're relying on your own daughter. I'm relying on his parents. Who is close and who is distant is up to you." Fan Xian laughed in spite of himself and said, "I don't think Sir Sun finds it difficult." After these words were said, even Wang Zhikuan couldn't resist stroking his beard and smiling. He thought, the Duke was indeed harsh and ruthless. Who in officialdom did not know of the Jingdou magistrate, Sun Jingxiu, who had profited from misfortune? If his daughter had not sold him out, he would probably have died long ago. Of course, every time this matter was brought up in officialdom, they couldn't help but discuss with shifty eyes how far Sir Fan Jr. had harmed the young lady, who placed righteousness before family, for her to be able to do such a thing. Fan Xian was only passing through Yanjing. His main goal was to go to Dongyi and participate in Sigu Jian's last opening of the Sword Hut. Everyone under heaven knew that this opening of the Sword Hut was probably the last time this great grandmaster would meet the world. The opening ceremony this time was very grand. Not only did nobles from Dongyi and the vassal states around the city go forward to give their greetings, but even Northern Qi and the Qing Kingdom, the two major powers in the world, were invited. Everyone guessed that Sigu Jian was probably going to use this last opening of the Sword Hut to decide where Dongyi would lean in the future. Thus, the Northern Qi and Qing courts did not dare slight and each sent out representatives. Because of Fan Xian's relationship with 13th Wang, he became the Qing kingdom's representative. As for why the imperial envoy would bring Wang Tong back to Yanjing along the way, it was because the matter of the great prince taking a secondary fei had been settled. In June, she would be preparing to enter the family. However, the reputation of a secondary fei was not good. For the sake of Wang Zhikuan's manor's face, the emperor placed particular importance on it. He had the young lady return home first and then take her thousands of li back to Jingdou. In Fan Xian's view, this was purely because he had eaten too much and had nothing to do. However, the Wang family was grateful for the emperor's favor and was unusually happy. He could only tire himself out. That night, Fan Xian and his group rested in the governor's manor. After Wang Tong happily bowed to Fan Xian, she ran back to her boudoir to wait for the nannies to teach her the rules of marriage. At the banquet, Wang Zhikuan looked at Fan Xian awkwardly and said, "I have troubled you these few months." The governor knew the great prince's attitude toward the matter of taking a secondary fei. Although he admired the great prince and wanted his daughter to marry him, as a father, he was always worried about his daughter. He knew that if Sir Fan Jr. had not taken up this matter, it would have been much more troublesome. Fan Xian smiled and didn't speak of this matter. Lowering his eyes, he quietly asked, "Who went from Northern Qi?" You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.